Hey there, story lovers. This is Beyond Hogwarts, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Zeus and Hera adopted Harry at age 5 and King of Gods made him immortal god of thunder and magic? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, The Cupboard and the Lightning. The storm rolled in from nowhere. That was the thing about divine weather, it didn't build gradually the way mortal storms did, grumbling up from the horizon with hours of grey warning. This one simply arrived, dropping over the quiet Surrey suburb of Privet Drive like a fist through paper, and the people of Little Whinging looked up from their evening routines with the vague, unsettled feeling that the sky was angry about something specific. Vernon Dursley slammed the back door shut against a gust that rattled every window in number 4 and turned the lock with the particular satisfaction of a man who believed that being inside meant being safe. He didn't notice the way the lock trembled in its housing. He didn't notice the way the lights flickered once, twice, then steadied with visible reluctance, as if something outside had briefly considered snuffing them entirely before deciding against it. He went to watch television. The storm was none of his business. In the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter was very much aware of the storm. He lay on his thin mattress, more suggestion than mattress, really, a rectangle of compressed springs that had given up any pretense of softness years ago, and listened to the thunder move overhead like something pacing. He was 5 years old and small for it, all sharp elbows and wide green eyes behind a pair of glasses held together at the bridge with a strip of Petunia's sewing tape. There was a spider in the upper corner of his cupboard that he'd named Gerald, and Harry was telling Gerald about the thunder in a whisper that was more breath than sound, because if Vernon heard him talking he'd lose dinner tomorrow too. "It's close," Harry breathed. "You can tell because the gap between the flash and the bang is getting shorter. Dudley told me that. He said 1 second gap means 1 mile away." He paused. He was being mean when he said it. He was trying to scare me. But I think it's actually true. Gerald did not respond. Gerald was, in Harry's experience, an excellent listener. The flash came through the gap under the cupboard door, a white so absolute it turned the whole world into a photograph for half a second, and then the thunder arrived not 1 second later but simultaneously, a crack so enormous that it wasn't really sound anymore, it was just pressure, and Harry felt it in his back teeth and his sternum and somewhere behind his eyes, and every light in number 4 went out. Petunia shrieked from the kitchen. Vernon bellowed something unprintable. Dudley began to cry with the particular escalating volume of a child who had learned that crying loudly produced results. Harry sat up in the dark and felt something strange. The thunder was still going, rolling and overlapping itself, and where he'd expected fear, where fear usually lived in him, a quiet permanent tenant in the space behind his ribs, there was instead something warm. Something that felt almost like recognition. He pressed his hand flat against the cupboard door and felt the wood vibrating under his palm. The lock clicked open on its own. Zeus had not intended to end up in Surrey. He'd been in the middle of a perfectly reasonable argument with Poseidon about Atlantic shipping lanes. His brother had been pushing a particularly aggressive current system through the North Atlantic again, purely to be difficult, when Clotho had appeared. Not walked in. Not knocked. Simply appeared, which was the kind of thing that even gods found disconcerting because the fates did not generally make house calls. She'd said 3 words, the thread phrase. And then she'd shown him. Not an image, exactly. More like a feeling pressed directly into the mind, the sensation of something enormously important balanced on the thinnest possible point, the way a single specific stone holds an arch together and you don't know which one it is until it's gone. He'd felt it as a wrongness, a thing about to be lost, and beneath it, wound through it like a golden filament, a signature he recognized from the prophecy the fates had spoken 800 years ago and that every god on Olympus had spent the intervening centuries quietly hoping meant someone else. Born of mortal sacrifice, marked by death's own passing, who shall stand between the age of gods and the dark that follows. He'd looked at Poseidon. Poseidon had looked at him. The shipping lanes can wait, Zeus had said, and then he'd gathered the storm around himself and come down. He found the street by feel more than sight, the thread pulled like a compass needle, undeniable, and he stood at the end of Privet Drive in the body he wore when he walked among mortals, a tall man, broad-shouldered, with white hair that was really lightning given the shape of hair, and eyes the precise color of the sky 2 seconds before it does something catastrophic. He wore the clothes of the era because Hera had impressed upon him 3 centuries ago that arriving naked or in a toga tended to distract from the point. The street was quiet and dark. Every house had gone black when the lightning struck. He was 3 steps up the pavement when he heard footsteps behind him and didn't turn around because he already knew. "I told you I was coming," Hera said. "You told me you might come. There's a difference." "There isn't, when it's me." She fell into step beside him, and she wore mortal clothes too, a dark dress, her dark hair back, and even dressed for Suri she had the kind of presence that made the air feel more substantial around her. "Which house?" Zeus looked at number 4. The thread was screaming now, a vibration at a frequency just below hearing that he felt in his knuckles. "That one." Hera looked at it for a long moment. It was a perfectly ordinary house. Neat hedges. A recycling bin tipped over by the wind. A garden gnome that someone had painted with a look of cheerful idiocy. She looked at it the way she looked at things when she was deciding whether they deserved her patience. "The child's inside?" "Yes. And he's been inside." It wasn't a question. Zeus understood this. She'd felt it too, the moment they'd turned onto the street. The quality of the thread had told them both what kind of inside they were talking about. Not inside playing. Not inside having dinner. Just, inside. The way something gets put inside when someone doesn't want to look at it. "Yes," he said again. Hera's jaw tightened once. Then she walked up the front path and knocked on the door of number 4 Privet Drive with the very specific energy of someone who had already decided how this conversation was going to end. Vernon Dursley opened the door with a torch and an expression prepared for a power company representative or possibly a neighbor complaining about something, and he got instead a woman who looked at him the way storms look at coastlines, and a man behind her who was so clearly used to standing at the center of things that he made Vernon's front step feel like a stage. "Mr. Dursley," Hera said. It wasn't a greeting. It was an identification. Vernon blinked. "Yes, that's, how did you? Who are you?" "We're here for the child," Zeus said. He looked past Vernon into the dark hallway. The torch beam caught the door of the cupboard under the stairs, and Zeus looked at it, and the cupboard door swung open before anyone moved or spoke. Harry was standing just inside. He'd clearly been in the middle of pushing it open himself, because his hand was outstretched in front of him and his expression was that very specific look of someone whose plan has just been completed by an outside party. He looked at Zeus. He looked at Hera. He looked back at Zeus. He was so small. Zeus had walked among mortals for millennia and children had never particularly struck him one way or another. They were small humans, interesting in the way that all mortal things were interesting, which was distantly and briefly. But this child was standing in a cupboard, and the thread of fate was blazing between them like a river of fire, and Harry Potter looked up at Zeus with eyes that were so specifically and stubbornly awake that Zeus felt something crack open in his chest that he couldn't immediately name. "Are you from the government?" Harry asked. "No," Zeus said. "Are you from the school?" His voice was careful. Practiced. The voice of a child who had learned to gather information before committing to a reaction. "No." "Then why are you here?" "We came for you," Hera said, and she crouched down so she was level with him, which meant she was the first adult Harry could clearly remember who had done that. Who had deliberately made themselves smaller to speak to him. He stared at her with those enormous green eyes and Hera looked steadily back and something passed between them that didn't need words to be completely understood. "I didn't do anything," Harry said reflexively. "I know," Hera said. "You didn't do anything wrong. We're not here because you did something wrong." From the kitchen doorway, Petunia Dursley made a sound like a stepped-on cat. "Now just a moment," she started, voice pitching up, "you can't just barge into our home and, Mrs. Dursley." Zeus turned to look at her, and it was the kind of look that the sky gives you when it wants you to understand that its patience is geological but finite. My wife and I are taking your nephew. You will not attempt to prevent this. You will, in fact, feel a specific variety of relief about this situation, and sometime next week you'll tell your husband that it was for the best and you'll both believe it entirely, because the alternative to that is a conversation about the last 5 years that none of us will enjoy. He paused. Especially you. The silence in the hallway was very complete. Petunia's mouth opened and then closed with a small click. Vernon had gone the color of old putty. Harry was watching all of this with the particular attention of someone cataloging information at speed. Then he looked at Hera and said, "Where are we going?" Hera smiled, and it was the kind of smile that rewrote the temperature of a room. "Somewhere with a proper bed," she said. "And a window. And dinner, if you haven't had it yet." Harry considered this. 5 years old, standing in a cupboard, and he considered it with the careful gravity of someone making a significant decision. Then he looked down at his feet, bent, and picked up a small stuffed lion with one ear that had been loved off entirely. "Okay," he said, and stepped out of the cupboard and did not look back once. Zeus had assumed they would simply take the boy back to Olympus and sort out the details there. Hera had other ideas. "He needs to eat first," she said, on the pavement outside number 4, while the storm still crackled overhead and Harry stood between them holding his one-eared lion. "And he's cold. When did you last eat, Harry?" Harry thought about it with transparent honesty. "Yesterday lunch." But it was quite a big lunch. He clearly had no idea this was something to be upset about, which somehow made it worse. "We'll eat," Zeus said, because he recognized the particular set of his wife's face and he knew a tactical concession when he saw one. Hera produced food the way gods produce things when they decide something needs to exist. It was simply there, a spread on the back garden wall of the empty house next door, sandwiches, a thermos of something hot, a slice of cake with actual icing. Harry's eyes went wide and then carefully, deliberately neutral, the way eyes go when someone has learned not to want things openly in case they're taken away. "It's for you," Hera said. "All of it." Harry ate with great focused seriousness, the way children eat when they aren't sure the next meal is guaranteed. Zeus sat on the wall beside him and didn't say anything. Hera poured the hot chocolate, it was hot chocolate, she'd decided, and handed it over and watched Harry's hands curl around the cup like it was a lifeline. Halfway through the sandwich, Harry said, "Are you magic?" "In a sense," Zeus said. "Aunt Petunia says magic isn't real." "Your aunt," Zeus said, with restrained diplomacy, "is wrong about many things." Harry processed this. "She says my mum and dad died in a car crash." "Your parents died protecting you," Hera said. "Your mother gave her life for you. That's not a car crash. That's something much braver and much more important, and you should know it." Harry looked at his sandwich. A muscle in his jaw worked. He was 5 and he was trying very hard not to cry, and the fact that he was trying so hard, the fact that he'd had to develop that kind of muscle so young, Zeus felt something in himself go very quiet and very certain. "What's your name?" Harry asked. "You can call me Zeus." "A beat. Like the god." "Exactly like the god." Harry looked up at him. The storm was still rolling overhead, but it had gentled, moving slower now, as if it too was waiting. "Are you actually Zeus?" "Yes." Harry considered this with the open, undefended logic that only very young children still had access to. Then he nodded, as if he'd run it through whatever internal checklist he used and found it satisfactory. "Okay," he said, and took a bite of his cake. Hera caught Zeus's eye over the boy's head, and something passed between them that had the character of a decision that both parties had already made and were only now acknowledging out loud. "Harry," Zeus said, "how would you like to come and live with us?" The boy looked up slowly. There was a piece of icing at the corner of his mouth and he was gripping his one-eared lion in the hand that wasn't holding cake. He was so careful, so braced for the catch, and Zeus thought, that's what it looks like when a child has learned that things are offered in order to be revoked. "For how long?" Harry asked. "Forever," Hera said. Simply. Without qualification. The word landed in Harry like thunder. He felt it, both of them could see him feel it, moving through him in a wave that started in his chest and worked its way outward, and for just a second, before he got control of his face again, the wonder in his expression was so naked and so vast that it looked like standing at the edge of the world. "For ever so long time," he said, very quietly. "We're gods," Zeus said. "We have time." And Harry Potter, age 5, holding a one-eared lion and a piece of birthday cake that no one had actually thrown a birthday party for, looked up at the sky where the storm was finally quieting, and said, "All right then." Olympus at night was something different from Olympus in the day. In the day it was gold and white and impossibly bright, the kind of place that looked like what you'd get if you asked someone to make a physical model of the word magnificent and they took the brief very seriously. The columns and the courtyards and the perpetual architectural argument between temples and gardens that had been going on for 5,000 years, all of it blazed in the daylight. But at night the mountain breathed differently. The gold went amber and the air tasted like ozone and starlight and something older than either, and the edges of things blurred slightly, the way a painting blurs at its extreme corners, as if Olympus was more idea than place when the sun wasn't watching. Harry stood at the edge of a balcony the size of a tennis court and looked at it all and didn't say anything for a very long time. Zeus stood behind him and also didn't say anything, which was not something he was naturally inclined toward but which seemed right. "It's real," Harry said eventually. "Not just the mountain. All of it." He was talking about the feeling, Zeus understood, the feeling of having been brought somewhere that was unambiguously and with no qualifications home, a feeling Harry had never had before and therefore had no filing system for. "It's real," Zeus confirmed. "I didn't know things could feel like this." "Like what?" Harry thought about it. "Like I was supposed to be here." Zeus put his hand on the boy's shoulder, carefully, because Harry still flinched slightly at unexpected contact, a reflex that made something cold and steady settle into Zeus's resolve, and Harry didn't pull away. He stood there with Zeus's hand on his shoulder and his green eyes enormous in the amber light and his lion tucked under one arm, and he looked like a person being introduced to the concept that they matter. Hera appeared from inside, because Hera always appeared exactly when she decided to, and she had a blanket that she tucked around Harry's shoulders with the practiced ease of someone who had decided she was a mother and was getting on with it. "The bedroom's ready," she said. "Come see." The bedroom was the size of a small house by Privet Drive standards, which was the wrong way to think about it, Harry decided, because probably everything here was going to be the size of a small house by Privet Drive standards. It had a bed with actual sheets and actual pillows, a window that looked out over the mountain, a desk, bookshelves that were empty and waiting, and a rug on the floor that looked like it had been woven out of clouds because it possibly had been. Harry stood in the middle of it and turned a slow circle. "What do you think?" Hera asked. "There's a window," Harry said. "There is. It opens." "It does." He walked to it and looked out at the mountain and the sky, and then he turned back and something shifted in his face, the careful neutrality cracking, just slightly, like ice in spring. "Thank you," he said, and it came out very small because large feelings often do. Hera smoothed the hair back from his forehead with infinite care, the scar there, lightning bolt shaped, caught the light and she looked at it for a moment with an expression that was equal parts tenderness and fury at the history of it, and said, "Sleep. Tomorrow we'll start." "Start what?" "Everything," she said. The council meeting had not been on Zeus's agenda for the following morning, but the gods had a way of organizing themselves around significant events the way weather systems organize themselves around pressure changes, and when Zeus arrived at the council chamber at what he considered an unreasonably early hour, they were all there. Athena had her arms folded and her gray eyes thoughtful. Hermes was perched on the back of a chair looking interested in the way he was interested in everything, which was to say with a quality of attention that was partially genuine and partially preparatory for later gossip. Apollo was leaning against a column looking simultaneously bored and alert, which was a face he'd spent centuries perfecting. Artemis stood near the window, apart from the rest, which was where she generally preferred to be. Dionysus was, somewhere. He usually was. And Ares was at the head of the table with his boots up on the marble and an expression like a storm that hadn't quite decided to break yet. "A mortal child," Ares said, before Zeus had even fully entered the room. "You brought a mortal child to Olympus." "I brought my son to his home," Zeus said. The room absorbed this. Hermes' eyes flickered between Ares and Zeus with the barely concealed delight of someone watching a magnificent thunderstorm from inside a very good shelter. "Your son," Ares repeated. "My adopted son." "Yes. You have never," Ares stopped. Restarted. "There are procedures. There is a process. You don't simply arrive with a child." "I'm Zeus," said Zeus. "I arrive with whatever I want." Athena's mouth moved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "The fates sent a thread," she said. It wasn't a question, she'd felt it, they'd all felt it, the resonance of the previous night's events. "The prophecy." "Yes. Then this isn't impulsive. You recognized the significance." "I recognized the child," Zeus said, and there was something in his tone that made Athena look at him more carefully. He did not elaborate. "He will be adopted formally, under divine law. He will be granted immortality. He will be named God of Thunder and Magic, as the fates indicated." "Thunder is yours," Ares said. His voice had gone flat. The boots came down off the table. "Thunder is mine to share as I see fit. I am king. You're making a child into a god." Ares stood, and he was big, war god big, the kind of size that was less about physical dimension and more about the weight of 10,000 battles pressing outward through his skin. "You're disrupting the divine order for a mortal child because the fates showed you a sign. The fates show us signs constantly. We don't rewire Olympus every time Clotho, Ares." Hera's voice came from the doorway. "Quiet. Absolute. Sit down." Ares looked at her. Ares, who faced armies, who walked into battles that leveled cities, who had never in his considerable divine life backed down from anything, looked at Hera and sat down. "The decision is made," Hera said. "The boy is ours. If any of you has an objection beyond wounded pride or jealousy dressed up as principle, I'll hear it now. Otherwise I suggest we discuss how to welcome a new member of this family, because that is what he is." The silence had a particular quality. Athena broke it by unfolding her arms. "I'd like to meet him," she said. "He's having breakfast," Hera said. He had seconds. Then he asked if he was allowed to, which we're going to work on. She said the last part to Zeus specifically, with a look that conveyed a complete conversation in 3 seconds. Zeus nodded. "When he's done, we'll introduce him." He looked around the room, at Athena's careful interest, Hermes' barely contained excitement, Apollo's studied neutrality, Artemis's watchfulness, and Ares' shuddered, smoldering something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite anything Zeus had a word for. "He is one of us now. Treat him accordingly." He meant it as a straightforward directive. What he didn't fully appreciate, not yet, was that Harry, even at 5, would make it unnecessary. That the gods would treat him accordingly not because Zeus commanded it, but because Harry Potter was, in the most fundamental way, impossible to ignore. The ceremony of divine adoption and immortality investiture had not been performed in over 2,000 years. Hera had spent the morning locating the relevant rites from the Olympian archives, which were less a library and more a geological formation of accumulated history, and had emerged with an armful of tablets and scrolls and a look of brisk competence that meant she'd already sorted everything out and was simply going through the proper forms for the record. Harry had been told about the ceremony with age-appropriate honesty, which was a concept Hera had apparently invented specifically for this situation because no one had ever needed it before. "Today," she'd said, over breakfast, "we're going to perform a ritual. It will make you part of our family officially, and it will change some things about you, make you stronger, make you live forever, give you power over thunder and magic. It won't hurt." Well, she'd paused, doing him the credit of being accurate, it might feel strange. Like a lot of energy moving through you at once. But not pain. Harry had thought about this. Will I still be me? More so, Hera had said firmly. He'd nodded. Okay. The ceremony took place on the highest platform of Olympus, open to the sky, which on this particular afternoon had arranged itself into a dome of deep blue that was slightly too vivid to be natural because it wasn't. It was the sky paying attention, the sky as audience. All the gods were there. Even Dionysus had materialized, looking more alert than usual. Hermes had brought flowers, which were unnecessary but which Harry had noticed and about which his expression had done something private and pleased. Harry stood at the center of the platform in clothes Hera had found for him, simple, well-made, nothing ostentatious, because she had good instincts, and he looked at the assembled gods of Olympus looking back at him and he did not flinch or shrink. He stood with the lion under his arm because he'd asked if he could bring it and Hera had said yes without hesitation, and he stood straight, and he watched. Athena was watching him watch them and a small line appeared between her brows that meant she was recalibrating something. Zeus moved to stand before his son, and the word arrived naturally in his mind now, with no qualifier, and the sky tightened above them, clouds pulling in from the horizon the way dogs come when called. Harry James Potter, Zeus said, and his voice had the quality it had when he was being Zeus the king rather than Zeus the person, resonant and layered and carrying the weight of all the sky from horizon to horizon. By divine law, by the consent of the fates, and by the right of the Olympian throne, I name you my son. Blood of my purpose if not my body. Fire of my house. Do you accept this? Harry looked up at him. Yes, he said, with absolute simplicity. Hera placed her hand on Harry's head, and her voice was quieter but somehow no less vast. I name you my son. Protected by my will. Loved by my choice. Do you accept this? Yes. Then receive what is ours to give. What happened next was a thing that none of the gods who witnessed it would fully describe afterwards, not because it was indescribable but because describing it felt like reducing it. The sky broke open above the platform, not with violence but with release, the way a door opens, and lightning came down. Not to strike, not to burn, but to pour, a column of white gold light from the heavens to the platform and directly into Harry, who closed his eyes and lifted his face up to it and felt it move through him like a river finding its bed. The magic arrived separately, slower, rising from beneath, from the earth of Olympus, from the deep bones of it, from the place where the world's magic pooled before it distributed itself outward into all the mortal lands below. It met the lightning in Harry's chest and the two things recognized each other, as if they'd been waiting for a vessel that could hold them both, and then they settled. Harry opened his eyes. They were still green. But there was lightning in them now, not literally, not visibly, just the quality of it, the specific aliveness of a sky about to do something extraordinary. How do you feel? Zeus asked. Harry looked at his hands. The air around him was very slightly charged. The clouds overhead were rotating at a speed that bore no relation to the actual wind. Like I was always going to be here, Harry said, with the satisfied certainty of a puzzle piece that has finally found its slot. Somewhere at the back of the gathered gods, Hermes leaned to Athena and whispered, I like him. Athena didn't look at Hermes. But she said, so do I, and the thoughtful line between her brows had smoothed into something that looked a great deal like anticipation. Ares stood at the edge of the platform and watched the boy who had just been given a piece of what was his, what had always been associated with his father and his legacy, and something moved behind his eyes that was complicated and old and not entirely resolved. Harry didn't look at Ares. He turned to Zeus, and his face was so open with something that Harry hadn't let himself feel in all 5 years of his life because feeling it was too dangerous and now wasn't, now it was safe, now it was real, that Zeus, king of gods, who had survived titans and wars and the long brutal weight of eternity, felt his throat close with something entirely and unexpectedly human. He put his arms around his son and held him, and Harry held on with both arms in a grip that suggested he'd been waiting to hold something like this for his entire short life. The lion was squashed between them. Neither of them moved to fix it. On the platform of Olympus, in the breathing blue dome of afternoon sky, the gods of Greece watched the king of them hold a 5-year-old boy with a scar on his forehead and one-eared lion, and something in the ancient air of the mountain shifted, settled, and became permanent. The world had just changed. It would take a while for the world to notice. 3 weeks later, Harry discovered he could call lightning deliberately. He'd been in one of the training yards. Technically he wasn't supposed to be there unsupervised, a rule that had been established in response to the incident where he'd wandered into Ares's armory and rearranged everything by instinct into configurations that were, according to Athena, who had been quietly delighted, strategically superior to the originals. Ares had not been delighted. The rule had been made. Harry had gone anyway, because the rule was clearly for his protection and he felt entirely fine, and he'd been looking at the target dummies at the far end of the yard when he'd raised his hand, more experimentally than anything, and thought about lightning, and a bolt had come down from the clear sky above the yard and hit the center target dummy so precisely that it left a perfect circular scorch mark in the wood. He looked at his hand. He looked at the sky. He looked at the scorch mark. He raised his hand again and did it 3 more times, moving the target each time, adjusting aim in a way that shouldn't have been possible without months of practice, but that felt like pointing was all it was, just indicating the sky's attention. There, he thought, and there it went. You found the yard. He turned. Athena was standing at the entrance, in her training gear, with an expression that he was beginning to recognize as her specific flavor of pleased but carefully contained. I was curious, Harry said. He wasn't apologetic about it. Hera had told him specifically that curiosity was not something to apologize for. I can see that. Athena walked into the yard and looked at the scorch marks, 5 of them, all centered, all precise. She picked up a stone and set it on a post at the far end of the yard. Do that again. Harry looked at the stone. He raised his hand. The lightning came down and the stone exploded into chalk dust. Athena looked at the space where the stone had been. How does it feel? Easy, Harry said, and then looked like he was checking whether that was the right answer. Good, Athena said. It should. You are the god of thunder. It should feel like breathing. She set another stone. Again. But this time, smaller. Don't destroy it. Move it. This was harder. Harry concentrated, and the lightning that came was thinner, a thread rather than a column, and the stone jumped 3 feet to the left and sat there smoking gently. Better, Athena said, with the brisk approval of someone who had just confirmed the hypothesis. You learn very quickly. Is that good? Athena looked at him with her full attention, which was the kind of attention that categorized while it observed. Harry. You are the god of thunder and magic. You just accurately lightning struck a moving target you moved yourself, on your 3rd week of existing as a divine entity. What do you think? Harry considered this. Good. Yes. She sat down on the yard wall and looked at him steadily. No one is going to go easy on you here because you're new. Not really. The gods don't work that way. But I want you to know something. She paused, choosing words with visible care. You are going to be very powerful. Possibly more powerful than any of us understand yet, including you. That doesn't make you better than anyone else. But it does mean you need to understand it clearly, without false modesty and without arrogance, because those are both just different ways of not seeing the truth. She met his eyes. Can you do that? Harry looked back at her steadily. I think so. Good. She stood up and pulled out a training sword. Then we'll start. The training lasted until Hera came looking for him, found 2 students completely absorbed in a session that had evolved rapidly from sword basics into an improvised discussion of combat theory that involved Harry's lightning being used as both a weapon and a defensive tool simultaneously, and stood at the yard entrance for a long moment watching before she said anything. Dinner, she said finally. Harry looked up from the illustration he'd been scratching into the yard stone floor with a piece of chalk Athena had produced. 5 more minutes. Now, Hera said. Harry stood up, brushed chalk dust from his hands, and then looked at Athena. "Same time tomorrow?" Athena looked at Hera, who was watching with an expression that was doing a complicated amount of work. "Same time tomorrow," Athena confirmed. Harry ran toward the gate, and Hera put her hand on his head as he passed and he tilted into it briefly, unconsciously, the way a plant tilts toward light, and then he was through the gate and running, shouting something about wanting to check on the clouds he'd been stacking in the East training court. Athena watched him go. "He's not afraid of anything," she said to Hera. "He's been afraid his whole life," Hera said. "He's just done with it." Athena thought about this for a long moment. Then she picked up her training sword and looked at the 5 scorch marks on the far targets and the stone sitting 3 feet from where it had been placed, and she said, very quietly, like someone making a note to themselves for future reference, "Good." The night before his 1-month anniversary on Olympus, a marker only Harry was keeping track of, because he counted carefully now, he kept time like a treasure, he sat on the balcony with his lion and looked at the stars. He was thinking about his parents. He did that sometimes, in the quiet. He didn't know their faces, not really, there was no photograph in his cupboard, no story in the Desleys' house. What he had was Hera's words, "Your mother gave her life for you." He turned this over in his mind the way you turn a stone, looking for all its angles. He heard Zeus settle into the chair beside him, the way Zeus was occasionally prone to doing, joining him without announcement, sitting in easy silence, which was not something Harry had ever associated with adults before coming here and which he'd quietly decided was one of his favorite things. "Tell me about my mum," Harry said. Zeus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Her name was Lily. She had your eyes. She was brilliant, the kind of brilliant that makes the air feel more charged when someone with it walks into a room. She loved your father, and she loved you with a power that broke the laws of death itself, which I can tell you as someone who makes laws, is not easy." Harry was looking at the stars. "Did you know her?" "Not personally. But the fates showed her to me, the night they showed me you." Zeus paused. "She would be glad you're here." "That's not a comfortable thing for me to say because I know you might wish she were here instead, and that's fair. But it's true." Harry was quiet. Then, "I don't wish you weren't here instead," he said carefully, because he was 5 and he was precise about words when they mattered. "I wish she was also here." "That's different." Zeus looked at his son. "Yes," he said, "it is." Harry tucked his chin on his knees and looked at the stars and said, with 5-year-old certainty, "When I'm big enough, I want to find whoever killed her and make sure they can't do it again." The air on the balcony shifted. The clouds in the distance moved. "You will be," Zeus said. Not a promise, a statement of fact, delivered by someone who had looked at the thread of fate and knew exactly what it meant. "And we'll help you." Harry nodded, satisfied with this, and went back to looking at the stars. The lion sat between them on the balcony railing, one ear missing, watching the same sky. Chapter 2, The God in the Storm. The first time Harry made it rain inside the library, he was 7 years old and deeply annoyed about irregular Greek verb conjugations. It started as a feeling, the tight, buzzing pressure behind his eyes that he'd learned to recognize as his magic looking for an outlet when he was frustrated. He'd been staring at the same tablet for 40 minutes, the one with the declension tables that Athena had assigned him with the specific smile she used when she thought something would be difficult, and the words had blurred together into meaningless scratches, and he'd thought with considerable feeling, "I hate this tablet." The tablet disagreed with him by staying exactly where it was. The weather, however, had more sympathy. A cloud appeared at ceiling height, just one, small and gray and personally offended, and it rained directly onto the tablet for 3 seconds before Harry noticed what was happening and reined it in. The tablet was ruined. The declension tables were illegible. Harry looked at it. He was aware he should feel bad about this. He mostly felt that the problem had resolved itself. He'd told Hera about it at dinner and she'd given him the look, the one that meant she was deciding between amusement and responsibility, and had said, very evenly, "Tomorrow you'll rewrite the entire conjugation table from memory, and if you can do that, I'll have Athena make a harder one." But I didn't, from memory, Hera repeated, with the serene implacability of a woman who had been running a divine household for several thousand years and could not be moved by child logic. Harry rewrote the table from memory. He didn't make another personal rain cloud in the library, but not because he couldn't, and everyone in the household was aware of this distinction. The years on Olympus didn't accumulate slowly the way they had in the cupboard, marked by the grinding sameness of days that were all bad in the same way. They moved fast and full, packed with things that mattered, training in the yards with Athena, who had become his most consistent sparring partner and who had stopped holding back after the first month when she'd realized that holding back was doing both of them a disservice. Mornings with Hera, who taught him things that weren't on any official curriculum, how to read a room, how to know when someone was lying versus when they simply believed something wrong, how power worked in spaces where no one was officially armed. Evenings sometimes with Zeus, who taught him the sky with the casual intimacy of someone introducing their child to a family home, walking him through weather systems and currents and the specific feel of different types of lightning the way other fathers might teach their children to fish. The magic was wild and joyful and sometimes deeply inconvenient. By the time Harry was 7, Hermes had developed a system for early warning. He'd appear at whatever doorway was nearest to Harry and say, in a tone of academic announcement, "The east wing is crackling," or, "There are small fires happening again," or once, memorably, "Several things are floating in a generally upward direction in the training yard and I think you should know." Harry had floated himself first by accident, age 6, mid-conversation with Hermes, both of them arguing about whether Hermes had actually won a particular footrace or whether the timing had been rigged by Hermes himself, and Harry had gotten heated about it and had looked down to find himself 3 feet off the ground. He'd stayed there for a moment, more surprised than alarmed, and then had drifted down like a leaf and had said, with forced casualness, "I knew I could do that." "You absolutely did not," Hermes said. "I suspected," Harry amended. "You looked like someone who'd stepped off a building and was revising their expectations." Harry had practiced flight until he could do it as naturally as walking, which took 2 weeks, which was a fact that Hermes reported to Apollo with visible glee because Apollo had bet a month of music that it would take at least 6. The flight had an instinctive quality, less like fighting gravity and more like simply not agreeing with it, which was very on brand for Harry by then. The magic grew with him. It was always slightly ahead of his understanding, like a river that runs faster than you can walk alongside it, and the best he could do was keep pace. He could move objects with a thought by age 6. By 7 he could pull weather systems across the mountain with something approaching precision, and the lightning responded to his mood so reliably that the other gods had developed an informal system of checking the sky above the training yards before approaching him with news they expected him to find disagreeable. The thunder was different from the magic. The thunder was his in a different way, more primal, more physical, less thought and more body. When he called lightning he felt it in his bones first. When it came from something that had always been in him and was now just allowed to come out, and the distinction between Harry the boy and Harry the god of thunder was not really a distinction at all. He didn't put on divinity the way you put on armor. He wore it the way he wore his skin. Ares, watching from the upper training gallery one afternoon when Harry was running forms with the gladius and periodically redirecting lightning mid-strike in ways that shouldn't have been physically coherent, had said nothing for a long time. Then he'd said, to no one in particular, "He's 8. Athena, who had appeared at his shoulder sometime in the last 2 minutes because that was a thing she did, said, "Yes. He shouldn't be this good at 8. "He's not good," Athena said, watching Harry drive a lightning bolt through a training dummy with the sword as a conductor while simultaneously keeping his footwork clean. "He's exceptional. There's a difference." Ares's jaw was working. "Because of what Father gave him." "Partly." Athena tilted her head. "Partly because of what he already was. The divine gifts don't create capability, Ares. They amplify it. Father saw what was already there." She glanced sideways at her brother. "The thread wasn't chance." "I know what the thread was," Ares said, flatly. "Do you?" He left without answering, which was, Athena thought, a kind of answer. Harry was 9 when he first asked about the scar. He'd known about it, Of course he had, it was on his face, but he'd known about it the way you know about something you haven't examined yet. Hera had touched it the first night. Zeus had looked at it, briefly, on the platform at the ceremony. No one had brought it up, and Harry had not been in a habit of bringing things up first because that was a skill you unlearned quickly in a house like the Dursleys. He'd been gradually remembering that it was safe to ask questions, but this one had sat in him for a while, acquiring weight. He asked Zeus at breakfast, direct and without preamble, because preamble was something he'd never really had patience for. What made my scar? Zeus set down his cup. He looked at Harry for a moment, not to decide whether to answer but to find the right words, which Harry had learned to read correctly in the years since he'd arrived and spent early months misreading it as hesitation to answer at all. A man, Zeus said. A dark wizard. He called himself Voldemort. The name dropped into the morning air. Harry waited. He murdered your parents when you were 15 months old. Then he tried to kill you. He used a curse that is designed to kill with absolute certainty, there is no blocking it, no surviving it. Zeus met Harry's eyes. Except that your mother stood in front of you and refused to move, and her love, and it was something more than ordinary love by then, it was a choice made with complete knowledge and no hesitation, left a mark on you that the curse couldn't process. It reflected back. Harry thought about this. Did it kill him? Came close. He lost his body. He's still out there, not dead, not truly alive. A fragment. And the scar is where it hit me. The scar is a record, Zeus said. Of what your mother did. Harry lifted his hand and touched it, and didn't say anything for a moment. Then, does it connect us? Me and him? Zeus's eyes sharpened slightly. What makes you ask that? Sometimes I feel things that aren't mine. Harry said it simply, factually, the way he reported most things. Not often. Like a color at the edge of vision that's coming from outside. He paused. It feels like something rotting. Zeus was quiet for a 3 count. Yes, he said. There is a connection. The curse left traces in both of you. We're going to work on blocking it. Hera has found references to mental shielding techniques that should, I've already been blocking it, Harry said. Zeus stopped. How long? Since about a year after I got here. I didn't like the feeling so I made a wall. He shrugged, which was a very Harry gesture, not dismissive, just matter of fact. It mostly works. Zeus looked at his son across the breakfast table. His 9-year-old son who had built a mental fortification against a fragment of one of the darkest souls in the last century because he'd found the intrusion annoying, without being taught, without knowing what he was doing, instinctively and correctly. I'm going to have Athena work with you on that, Zeus said. Properly. Can she do better than what I've got? Almost certainly not in kind, Zeus said. But she can make it more efficient. Harry appeared to find this acceptable, and went back to his breakfast. He ate with genuine appetite now, with the relaxed ease of someone who had never once in 4 years had a meal pulled away from them, and the relief of watching it had never worn off for Zeus completely. What does he want? Harry asked, a few minutes later. Voldemort. Power. Immortality. The usual architecture of a person who is terrified of their own insignificance and has chosen destruction as the solution. Harry made a face. That's stupid. Yes, Zeus said. It is. It's also very dangerous. Both things can be true, Harry said, which was something Hera said regularly, and the rhythm of it in Harry's mouth made Zeus quietly glad in a way he still occasionally surprised himself with. If he's still out there, he'll come back properly eventually. He will. And then we'll deal with him. We. Not you, not I. We. Zeus turned his cup in his hands. Yes, he said. We will. Harry nodded, satisfied, and stole a piece of ambrosia from Zeus's plate with the casual audacity of a child who had learned he was loved and was now fully leveraging it. The sparring sessions with Athena had evolved over the years into something neither of them had entirely planned. They'd started formally, proper instruction, correct form, the patient framework of actual teaching. But Harry learned so fast that formal instruction became rapidly insufficient, and somewhere around age 8 they'd shifted into something more like collaborative experimentation, which was more interesting for both of them and significantly more explosive for the training yard. On a morning 2 weeks after Harry's 9th birthday, they were working on a problem Athena had set: how to use lightning as a component of hand-to-hand combat without losing mobility. The obvious answer, which Harry had rejected in the first 5 minutes, was to hold a charge and release on contact. Too slow, too telegraphed, too dependent on getting close. Harry was working out something more interesting. He was moving through the yard at speed, and the lightning was moving with him, not as a single bolt but as a field, like static, close to his skin, responsive to his intentions. When he extended a strike, it extended with him. When he pivoted, it pivoted. It was less like using lightning as a weapon and more like the lightning itself was fighting alongside him. "Stop," Athena said. Not a training stop, a genuinely interested stop. Harry dropped out of movement and looked at her. "Do that again." The pivot at the third step. Harry pivoted. The lightning field moved with him, wrapping around his movement, and for a second the training yard smelled like a thunderstorm. "You're not generating it," Athena said slowly. "You're wearing it. There's a difference." "I know," Harry said. He was slightly out of breath, not from exertion but from concentration, which was a distinction he'd explained to Athena once and she'd filed with great interest. "It's easier. Making bolts is like shouting. This is more like talking." Athena sat on the yard wall with her arms folded and her head tilted, which was her processing posture. "The magic works the same way." Harry considered. He extended his hand and the air around it shimmered, not dramatically, not visibly to anyone who wasn't looking, but the quality of the light changed, the way air changes over hot stone. "The magic is more like a language," he said. "And the thunder is more like a feeling." When they worked together, he brought his hands together slowly and the shimmering and the charge met between his palms, and the air between his hands became briefly, beautifully, a small storm in miniature. "It's like both at once." Athena looked at the small storm. "Does that feel like effort?" "No." "Does any of this feel like effort?" Harry looked at her directly. "The precision is work. The raw stuff isn't." He let the small storm dissolve. "Is that a problem?" "The opposite," Athena said. "But it means the work we need to do is more sophisticated than I originally planned, which is frankly the most exciting thing that's happened to my lesson schedule in about 40 years. She uncrossed her arms. "Come on. Let's talk about what precision actually means for someone with your specific toolkit." They talked for 2 hours and didn't pick up a weapon once, which was the most effective training session of the year. Hermes found Harry in the Cloud Gardens at dusk. The Cloud Gardens were technically Zeus's, a tiered section of the mountain where weather accumulated before distribution, where clouds formed and dissipated, where the air tasted like rain that hadn't happened yet. Zeus liked to walk there in the evenings. Harry had started following him at age 6 and had never stopped, and somewhere in the first year Zeus had started timing his walks to when Harry might join him, though neither of them had said this out loud. But Zeus wasn't here tonight. There was a council thing, a dispute between Poseidon and a sea kingdom that had apparently reached critical mass, and Harry was alone in the clouds, sitting on a formation that had developed a flat top at roughly bench height in a way that was probably not coincidental, trailing one hand through mist. Hermes landed next to him with the complete lack of preamble that was his defining characteristic. "Brooding?" he asked cheerfully. "Thinking," Harry said. "Ah. Those are different things. I usually mix them up too." Hermes tucked his winged sandals to a neutral position and sat. "What's the topic?" Harry was quiet for a moment, watching the mist curl between his fingers. "Ares," he said. Hermes did not visibly react, which meant he'd expected this. He'd been waiting for this conversation for about 2 years, honestly. What about him? He doesn't like me. That's not entirely accurate, Hermes said carefully. He resents me, Hera said, correcting himself with precision. Which is worse than not liking me, because it means I've done something to him without trying to, and I don't know what. You know what, Hermes said gently. Hera looked at him. Green eyes, lightning lit. 9 years old and looking at Hermes with the expression of someone who knows the answer and is checking whether the other person will say it honestly. He feels like I took something from him, Hera said. He feels like you were given something that should be about him, yes. Thunder it was always associated with Zeus. Ares is a war god, and war gods and thunder gods have always had a competitive proximity. He's been next to the throne his whole existence and he's never been given what you were given in your first day. Hermes tilted his head. That's not your fault. I know it's not my fault. Hera said it without heat, plain fact. But it's still true. And it means he's going to do something about it eventually. He looked back at the clouds. What I want to know is what. Hermes was quiet for a long enough moment that Hera turned to look at him again. I genuinely don't know, Hermes said, and the honesty in it was different from his usual register, stripped of the airy humor. He's not stupid. He knows the fates are involved. He knows that challenging you directly is challenging Zeus, which even Ares won't do openly. He paused. But Ares has always been good at waiting, and he has always been better than anyone gives him credit for at working around things rather than through them. Hera absorbed this. He filed it in the way he filed things that mattered, not obsessively, not anxiously, just accurately. Noted, mapped, not forgotten. Okay, he said. That's all. Just okay. What else should I say? Hera looked at him sideways and something flickered in his expression that was almost humor. He's going to do something. So I'll watch, and when he does, I'll deal with it. He shrugged. I'm not afraid of him. Hermes looked at Hera for a long moment. You're not afraid of anyone, he said. I've noticed. There's not much point, Hera said. Fear is just information. I use it and then I let it go. He paused. Hera said that. The letting go part. Of course she did. Hermes smiled. She's usually right. Don't tell her I said that or she'll make me write about it. Hermes laughed, the genuine article, sharp and light, and the clouds around them shifted in response, brightened slightly, as if the mountain was amused. They sat in the cloud gardens as the amber light deepened to violet, two gods of vastly different ages and almost identical comfort with silence, and Hera pulled his knees to his chest and was, without being able to name it, completely and entirely home. The trouble with Ares announced itself on a Tuesday, which Hera would later say was appropriate because Tuesdays were named after a war god and the universe had a sense of poetry about these things. Hera was 10. He'd been on Olympus 5 years, which had ceased to feel like a count and had just become the shape of his life. He was in the Eastern practice court working through an advanced combat form Athena had designed specifically for someone who fought with lightning as a body element rather than a ranged tool, when the doors opened and Ares walked in not as if he'd dropped by but as if he'd decided to arrive. He was in full war regalia, not training gear, full armor, the crimson and bronze that made him look like battle given a body, and he was carrying a weapon Hera didn't recognize, a spear with a head that was dark and smoking at the edges in a way that had nothing to do with heat. Hera stopped mid-form and turned to face him. He didn't straighten to attention or reach for a weapon. He just stopped and waited, which Ares appeared to find more irritating than either of the alternatives. You've been training in my father's yard, Ares said. Everyone trains in these yards, Hera said. Not with these. Ares indicated the scorch marks on the far wall, the training dummies that had been systematically destroyed and replaced and destroyed again. You use this place like it's yours. Zeus said I could, Hera said simply. Ares stepped further into the yard. He moved the way soldiers moved, like the ground owed him passage. Zeus says a lot of things lately. About you. Is that a problem? It's an observation. Okay, Harry said. Why are you here, Ares? Actually here, I mean. Not the pretense. Ares stopped. His eyes, dark, sharp, with the quality of weapons in them, moved over Harry with the assessing look of a general cataloging an unknown force. Harry looked back with nothing on his face but patient attention. I want to see what he made, Ares said. The pretense had been thin anyway, credit to him for dropping it. What you actually are. Not the training ground versions. Not what Athena shows him. He looked at the dark spear in his hand. Fight me. The yard went very quiet. Harry looked at the spear. He looked at Ares. He was 10 years old and Ares was the god of war, and the answer to this situation, if you were following conventional wisdom, was to say no, to wait, to find a way around the confrontation. Conventional wisdom had never had much of a home in Harry. Put the proper spear away first, Harry said. You brought that to intimidate me. I'm not intimidated. So it's not useful. Ares's eyebrows moved, almost imperceptibly. And if we're doing this, Harry continued, we're doing it with actual rules, not a war god deciding he can break something and call it training. He picked up a practice sword from the rack, wood core, metal edge, the real sparring equipment. Unless you only fight people you can kill. In which case I think we've learned something about you. The silence stretched. Then Ares set the spear against the wall. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said. I've heard both, Harry said pleasantly, and moved. He was fast. That was the thing about him that people always processed slightly too late. He looked like a boy, even at 10, slight and green-eyed, and by the time they'd accounted for the speed they'd already missed the first exchange. He covered the distance between them in 3 steps and came in low and left, the classic feint that Athena had taught him and that he'd refined into something that barely looked like a feint anymore, that looked like a genuine attack until it wasn't. Ares deflected it with the ease of someone who had been fighting since before writing existed. But his eyes sharpened. He'd felt the force of it. They moved around each other and the room changed, not physically, but in atmosphere, the way the air changes on a battlefield, tighter and more purposeful. Harry wasn't fighting defensively. He'd never been good at defensive fighting because he didn't think in terms of protecting himself, he thought in terms of solving problems, and Ares was a problem he was working to solve with the focused curiosity he brought to everything. He felt the lightning at the edge of his awareness, available, waiting. He didn't use it. This wasn't that kind of problem yet. Ares came forward with a sequence that Harry recognized from Athena's instruction. She'd used it as an example of war god fighting styles, the kind of multi-layered attack that looked simple until it had already committed you to a trajectory you didn't plan. Harry let the first 2 moves happen, rode them the way you ride a wave, and on the third shifted his weight and redirected Ares's momentum using it rather than countering it. Ares went 2 steps further than he'd intended. Not enough to call it anything. But enough that his eyes, when he turned back, had something new in them. They fought for 20 minutes. Harry got hit twice, once in the ribs, once across the shoulder, and both of them left bruises that he'd have for a week, and he landed 4 clean exchanges that against anyone other than Ares would have ended the fight. Ares didn't end. Ares was a war god and war didn't end until it decided to. But somewhere around the 15-minute mark, he'd stopped fighting like he was testing something and started fighting like he was actually trying, which was, Harry would realize later, the closest thing to respect that Ares had in his register. When they stopped, naturally, without announcement, the way fights between people who are paying attention always stop when both parties have what they came for, they were both breathing hard and the yard looked like weather had been through it. Ares looked at him for a long time. Who taught you to redirect force like that? Athena, Harry said. Mostly. Some of it I worked out. The weight shift on the third beat. That's not Athena's. No, Harry agreed. That's mine. Ares looked at his practice sword. He looked at Harry. The something that lived behind his eyes, the complicated, old, not quite resolved thing, moved and didn't settle. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "A child given power he didn't earn." "The power was given," Harry said. "The using of it," he gestured vaguely at the general state of the yard, "that part's been work." Ares looked at the yard. He looked at Harry. Then he picked up his dark spear from the wall, and his expression was unreadable in the way that only gods with long histories and complicated feelings were unreadable, and he walked out without another word. Harry stood in the rec training yard, prodded his bruised ribs, decided they were annoying but fine, and went to find Hermes to tell him that Ares had come, which Hermes would want to know. He was not afraid of what Ares might do next. He was paying attention, which was the more useful response. The storms came when he was 11. Not metaphorically, actual storms, sequences of them, building over the Aegean with the specific organized intensity of weather that had intent. 3 in a week. Each one larger. Each one with a signature that no natural storm had, a quality of directed anger that moved in patterns rather than chaos. Zeus spent 2 days tracing them and came back tight around the jaw and quiet in the way he was quiet when he was thinking fast. Typhon's breath, he told Hera, in the way that parents told each other things in front of children who were very nearly not children anymore and who they'd stopped pretending couldn't hear. Not the Titan himself, something that carries echoes of him. Loose in the deep ocean. Echoes don't generate 3-day storm sequences, Hera said. No, Zeus agreed. Something is directing them. Something with sufficient power and an interest in testing our boundaries. Harry, sitting across the room with a book he'd stopped reading 10 minutes ago, said, "Is it Ares?" They both looked at him. "He left that meeting with Poseidon's ambassador looking like he'd found something interesting," Harry said. Hermes mentioned it. And Ares has been, he considered the word, elsewhere, lately. Not in his usual places. Zeus looked at Hera. Hera looked at Zeus. "We don't know yet," Zeus said. "Okay," Harry said. "What do we do about the storms?" "Contain them," Zeus said. "I'll go out tonight and push them back." "It should, I can help with that," Harry said. "You're 11. "I've been working with storm systems for 3 years, Harry said, not defensively, just with the patient accuracy of someone correcting a mislabeling. "You've said yourself that my feel for weather is unusual," Zeus said. "You said unprecedented," Harry said. Hera made a sound that was technically a cough. "Come with me," Zeus said, after a moment of looking at his son. "You follow my lead. You don't engage anything you don't recognize." "Obviously," Harry said, and was already on his feet. They went out into the evening sky together, 2 gods of the storm, one who had held the sky since before memory and one who had been doing it for 3 years and was already, somehow, entirely himself in it, and the mountain watched them go and the air hummed in their wake. The storms were in the southern Aegean, rolling against each other in a way that was building toward something, 3 separate cells feeding each other in a configuration that was almost geometric. Harry felt them from 20 miles out, felt the organized quality of them, the intent underneath the weather, the thing that was using them as a hand uses a tool. Zeus was already working, threading lightning through the leading cell to disrupt its feed. Harry flew to the second cell and did not do what Zeus was doing. He went still inside it, very quiet, the way you go quiet when you're listening for something specific, and let the storm move around him until he could feel the signature underneath it, the directing influence, the thing holding the 3 cells in their configuration. He found it like finding a knot in a rope, a specific tightness in the system. He reached for it with his power not as a weapon but as a question, "What are you?" The answer came not in words but in sensation, old, cold, very far below, something that had been asleep for a long time and was not yet fully awake. Not Ares. Something older. Something that had been touched, recently, by someone with enough knowledge to find it and enough ambition to try. Harry pulled the knot apart. It was surprisingly easy, like pulling a pin from something elaborate. Once the anchor was gone, the 3 cells lost their geometry and became ordinary weather again, and the southern Aegean storm dissipated in about 8 minutes. Zeus found him hovering over quiet water and said, "What did you do?" There was something directing them. A deep thing. Someone touched it recently. Harry looked at the water. "When we get back, I think you need to talk to the fates again." Zeus was very still for a moment. "You felt all of that from inside a storm cell. You can feel a lot when you stop fighting the storm and just listen to it," Harry said. Zeus looked at his son. The kid was hovering over the Aegean with his hair sideways in the dying wind and his eyes lit with their lightning quality, and he looked like what he was, a god, a real one, settled in his power the way an old mountain settles in its stone, and Zeus, who had held the sky for longer than most things had existed, felt a specific variety of pride that he recognized as different from every other thing he'd felt in all those centuries because it was tangled up with love in a way that nothing else had been. "When we get back," he said, "you're going to tell me everything you felt. In detail." "I know," Harry said, and turned toward Olympus, and flew. The night before Harry turned 12, he was in Hera's garden. The garden was technically private, it was behind the main hall, accessed through a corridor that most of the gods treated as decoratively inaccessible, but Harry had been using it since he was 6 and Hera had never told him not to. She'd found him there once, asleep against the large olive tree with a book across his face, and had simply put a blanket over him and gone back inside, and they'd never discussed it. He sat against the olive tree now with the one-eared lion on the bench beside him. He still had it, though Gerald the spider was long gone and the lion had a small patch on its remaining ear that Hera had stitched without being asked, and he was, genuinely, thinking. Tomorrow he'd be 12. He'd been on Olympus 7 years. He knew how to fight with lightning and without it. He could move weather systems. He'd read more of Olympus's archives than any of the younger gods and several of the older ones. He had a family that was real and complicated and loud and occasionally infuriating and entirely, unreservedly his. And somewhere below Olympus, in the mortal world he'd come from, a fragment of a dark wizard was accumulating itself back toward substance. He'd felt it, twice now, through the connection the scar made between them, the rotting color thing at the edge of his awareness that his wall kept out. It was getting stronger. Not quickly. But surely. He also had a letter in his pocket. It had arrived 3 days ago, addressed in green ink, Mr. H. Potter, the Eastern Training Court, Mount Olympus. He'd stared at the address line for a solid minute, because the specific audacity of the owl finding Olympus was impressive enough to warrant acknowledgement, and then he'd opened it. "Dear Mr. Potter, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." He'd read it twice. Then he'd put it in his pocket and thought about it for 3 days, because he was that kind of person. He knew about Hogwarts. He knew about the wizarding world. Zeus had made sure of that, the same way he'd made sure Harry knew about every world that might eventually require navigation. He knew about Dumbledore, about the war that had ended the night his parents died, about the way the wizarding world had responded to his survival by making him into a symbol without his knowledge or consent. He had feelings about that. He heard the garden door and didn't turn around. "You've been out here for 2 hours, Hera said, settling on the bench with the particular ease of someone who knows a space intimately. She didn't move the lion. She sat beside it. "I'm thinking. About the letter?" He did turn then. "You know about it?" The owl was very confused, Hera said. "It spent 20 minutes flying in circles over the east wing. Hermes eventually helped it." She looked at him with the clear-eyed steadiness that was her specific flavor of maternal attention, the kind that didn't flinch from things. "Tell me what you're thinking." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to go." Hera didn't say anything. "I know what you might say, that I've had better education than any school can offer, that there's nothing there I can't already do, that the wizarding world has a complicated relationship with who I am and what I represent." He looked at the lion. "All of those things are true. But," Hera said. "But it's where I'm from. The mortal part of me. And Voldemort is connected to that world and he's building back, and if I'm going to deal with him eventually, which I am, we said I would, then I need to understand it from the inside. He looked up. And also I just want to go. Not everything has a strategic reason. Hera smiled, slow and true. No. Not everything does. Will you and father be angry? We'll worry, Hera said. That's different. You don't need to worry. We're parents, Hera said. Worrying is a feature, not a bug. She looked at him in the olive tree light, her son, this improbable, extraordinary child who had walked out of a cupboard under the stairs and into divinity without breaking a single step, and she said, "We'll talk to your father tomorrow. But Harry, if you go as yourself. None of this hiding what you are nonsense. The world is going to have to deal with you eventually." Harry's mouth curved. Was I going to hide anything? No, Hera said. But I like to establish these things explicitly. She stood, smoothed her dress, looked at him one more time. Come inside. It's nearly midnight. In a minute. She left without pressing it, because she knew him, because midnight on the night before his birthday was a private thing he kept, a moment of stocktaking that he'd developed in the years on Olympus as a replacement for the kind of birthday awareness the Desleys had taught him, which was no awareness at all. Harry looked at the stars. He was 12 tomorrow. He was the god of thunder and magic, son of Zeus and Hera, trained by Athena, loved by an entire mountain's worth of complicated immortal personalities. He was also Harry Potter, born of Lily and James, scarred by a dark wizard's failure, connected by blood and magic and prophecy to a world below that didn't know what was coming. The wind in the garden lifted, and the thunder moved in the distance over the sea, and Harry felt it in his chest the way he always did, that recognition, that rightness. He picked up the lion. Tomorrow, he told it, things get interesting. The lion, as always, didn't argue. Chapter 3, The Letter and the Lightning Rod. The Hogwarts Express smelled like chalk dust, old magic, and someone 2 compartments down who had a toad that was deeply unhappy about the journey. Harry stood on platform 9 3/4 and took it all in with the same patient attention he brought to new environments, the crowd of families, the steam from the engine, the distinctive taste of ambient wizarding magic in the air which was, he noted, different from Olympian magic the same way river water differed from rain. Same essential thing. Different character. The air here had a weight to it, a density of accumulated human magic over centuries, and it sat against his skin like pressure. He was wearing ordinary clothes. Hera had made a point of this. Nothing that says I came from elsewhere, she'd said, which was somewhat ironic given that he'd arrived through a corridor of divine light with Zeus's hand on his shoulder and had said goodbye to his father at the barrier because Zeus, who could have walked through it without blinking, had looked at the ordinary brick wall and the ordinary crowd of ordinary families and had said, "I'll see you at the holidays," in a tone that suggested he was pretending to be breezy about this and knew that. Harry knew it. You could come in, Harry had said. I could, Zeus agreed. I won't. Why? Zeus looked at him. Because this part is yours, he said. Not mine. Harry had stepped through the barrier alone, the way you do things that are yours. Now he stood on the platform with his trunk and his owl. Athena had given him the owl 3 days ago, white with golden eyes, a bird that looked like it had been designed to make a point, and watched the crowd. He was good at watching crowds. He could read the social architecture of a space very quickly, the currents of who deferred to whom and who was performing which version of themselves, and this crowd was interesting. Old families recognizable by the way they moved through space as if it owed them passage. New families identifiable by the barely contained wonder that they were trying to contain. Children running with genuine excitement. A pair of red-headed twins doing something that was probably not allowed. A woman with an enormous amount of bushy hair was herding a girl toward the train while reading a Hogwarts guidebook simultaneously, which Harry found deeply relatable. He was about to move toward the train when someone stepped into his path, not deliberately, just the organic bumping of a crowded platform, and he looked up into the face of a boy with white blonde hair and the kind of expression that had been practiced in mirrors. "You're Harry Potter," the boy said. Not a question. He'd clearly been looking. Yes, Harry said. Draco Malfoy. He said it with the specific cadence of someone who expected the name to land. Harry noted this without reacting to it. I've heard quite a lot about you. Have you? Harry said pleasantly. You disappeared, Draco said. After what happened with you-know-who. Everyone's been wondering where you went. What you've been doing. He looked at Harry with the assessing sharpness of someone who'd been taught to read people by parents who use people as currency. You're not what I expected. Most people say that, Harry said. What did you expect? Draco didn't answer that directly, which meant the honest answer wasn't something he wanted to say. Instead, there are the right people to know at Hogwarts, Potter. And the wrong ones. I can help you with that. Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was perfectly genuine, not unkind. That's good of you to offer, he said. I'll figure it out as I go. Draco blinked. That had clearly not been a response in his register. Harry moved past him toward the train, not in a way that was dismissive, just in the way of someone who knows where they're going and is going there. He heard Draco say something behind him but didn't catch the words, and it didn't particularly matter. He found a compartment near the middle of the train, occupied by a single boy with a round face who was crouched on the seat looking under it with an expression of profound personal distress. Have you lost something? Harry asked from the doorway. The boy looked up. He had kind eyes and the general bearing of someone who expected to be ignored. My toad. He gets away every year. I'm Neville, by the way. Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter. He put his trunk in and crouched down beside Neville. The toad was in the far corner under the seat, looking aggressively stationary. Harry reached in and picked it up, which was a thing the toad didn't apparently expect because it sat in his hands without protest. Neville stared. How did you do that? He runs from everyone. Harry handed it over. He was scared. Scared things go still when they feel held by something bigger than what they're afraid of. He settled into the seat. What's his name? Trevor. Neville clutched the toad with both hands and looked at Harry with the dawning expression of someone recalibrating. You're really Harry Potter. So I keep being told. The whole wizarding world's been. Neville stopped himself. Sorry. You probably know. I don't, actually, Harry said. Tell me. This was the right thing to say. Neville's posture changed entirely. He shifted from cautious to engaged, the way people do when they realize they're being genuinely asked rather than tolerated, and he told Harry about it with the earnest directness of someone who had too much information and too few people who wanted to hear it. The picture that emerged was, Harry thought, deeply strange. The wizarding world had spent 11 years building a mythology around him, the boy who lived, the infant who had somehow destroyed the most powerful dark wizard in a century, the symbol of hope that an entire community had pinned themselves to without asking his permission. Children his age had grown up with his name as a kind of touchstone. Books had been written. Cards had been made. He was, in the wizarding world, something between a saint and a celebrity, and he'd never once been there to have any say about it. He thought about this without visible reaction, which was a skill he developed on Olympus where divine politics required you to think several steps ahead without broadcasting the thinking. The compartment door opened and the bushy-haired girl he'd seen on the platform appeared, still carrying the guidebook. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost. Oh, there it is. She spotted Trevor and then spotted Harry and her eyes went slightly wider in the way of someone who did their research. You're Harry Potter. Every time, Harry said pleasantly. What's your name? She straightened slightly, as if she'd been evaluated and was presenting credentials. Hermione Granger. I've read about you. Well, about what happened when you were a baby. The books don't say much else because obviously no one knew where you went. She looked at him with the frank assessment of someone whose primary evaluation metric was intelligence. Can I sit down? It's a public train, Harry said, which she appeared to read correctly as yes. She sat across from Neville and opened the guidebook with the air of someone who had been waiting for this conversation. Are you excited about Hogwarts? I've read all the textbooks already, twice, and I've been practicing some of the spells. Ordinary magic doesn't seem to work quite the way the books describe it for me, which I think means my intuition is slightly ahead of my technical understanding, so I'm hoping the structured curriculum will. She stopped. Sorry. I talk when I'm nervous. You're not nervous, Harry said. You're excited. Hermione looked at him with the expression of someone who's been correctly read. How did you know? Nervous people apologize more. You're describing things. He smiled. Which spells have you been working on? Hermione told him. She was, Harry thought, very good. Her instincts were exactly what she described, ahead of her technical framework, which meant she was bending rules before she'd learned them, which was either the best or worst kind of magic student depending on who was teaching you. He let her talk and listen genuinely, and watched Neville relax by degrees next to her, and the train moved out of London and into countryside, and Harry looked out the window at England, at the mortal world running alongside the train, and felt a complicated mixture of things that resolved itself into simple interest. He was here. The world was wide and strange and entirely worth paying attention to. The door opened a third time and the Weasley twins looked in. Harry Potter, said one. In the flesh, said the other. We heard you were on the train, the first continued. Confirmed by 17 separate sources, said the second. They both grinned with the identical energy of people who had never once in their lives been intimidated by anything. Harry found this immediately compelling. Fred and George Weasley, said Hermione, with the tone of someone reading from a file. Third year. Known for, we prefer to remain undocumented, said the one who might be Fred. Keeps the element of surprise, agreed the probable George. Can we sit, said Fred. Or George. Yes, Harry said. They came in and arranged themselves with the comfortable chaos of people who'd been sharing spaces their whole lives, and the compartment became, very quickly, a thing that felt like the beginning of something. The sorting was, from Harry's perspective, interesting primarily as a piece of theater. He'd known about the sorting hat from Hera, who had a comprehensive knowledge of wizarding customs the way she had comprehensive knowledge of everything, thoroughly and without any particular affection for inefficiency. He'd thought about where the hat would put him and had arrived at Gryffindor as the probable answer but had also decided he'd be fine with anything because the container didn't change what was in it. The Great Hall itself he registered properly, the enchanted ceiling showing a cloudy evening sky, the candles, the scale of it, the specific quality of very old magic that had soaked into the stones over centuries. He felt it the way he felt the ambient magic of Olympus, that fullness in the air, though this had a different texture, more layered, more human in origin, less elemental. McGonagall read names alphabetically. Harry watched the sorting with genuine attention. Hermione had gone to Gryffindor with the hat barely on her head, which told you something both about her and about the hat's efficiency. Neville had gone to Gryffindor after a longer deliberation, the hat sitting on him for nearly a minute while Neville sat very still with his eyes closed, and when it called Gryffindor Neville looked genuinely surprised in a way that made Harry think the hat had disagreed with Neville's expectations of himself. When McGonagall called Potter, Harry, the hall went still in the specific way it goes still when everyone has been anticipating a moment and it finally arrives. Harry walked up to the stool and sat down and the hat dropped onto his head and went immediately and completely silent. Then, quietly, for Harry alone, oh. Harry waited. Well. This is different. The hat was sorting through the mental architecture it encountered, and its surprise was audible. I've sorted every student who's passed through this school for 1,000 years and I have never, you're not entirely, what are, take your time, Harry thought. You're a god, the hat said, with the flat wonderment of something encountering a category outside its taxonomy. Yes. You're also a student. A first year. You're both of these things and you're not confused about either of them. No. The hat processed this. Most students argue with me. About their house placement. About their qualities. You're not arguing. I don't need to. You'll put me where I fit. That's your job and you're presumably good at it. The hat made a sound that was probably a laugh if hats made sounds. Gryffindor, it announced, loudly, to the hall. The Gryffindor table exploded in applause, the Weasley twins making disproportionate noise. Harry took the hat off, placed it back on the stool with careful hands, and walked to the table and sat down next to Hermione who was beaming, and Neville who clapped with genuine warmth, and felt the 1,000 eyes of Hogwarts watching him with a collective attention that had the quality of an audience seeing the first scene of a play they'd been anticipating for over a decade. He ate his dinner and answered questions pleasantly and looked around the hall and took careful note of everything. Particularly the table where Draco Malfoy sat in green and silver, and the way Draco watched Harry with an expression that was recalibrating in real time. And the staff table, where a turbaned professor was eating very little and sitting with his back to the wall with the specific care of someone protecting something. And at the center of the staff table, Albus Dumbledore, who was watching Harry with the benevolent warmth of a man whose warmth had layers to it, who smiled and whose eyes were kind and whose attention had a weight to it that was not entirely the weight of kindness. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore smiled. Harry smiled back. He made a note. The next morning confirmed several things. Charms with Flitwick, who was genuinely excellent and who demonstrated Wingardium Leviosa and invited students to attempt it. Most students managed it within 10 minutes or so. Hermione managed it in 30 seconds and spent the remaining time helping Neville with his grip. Harry performed it without speaking the incantation, which he'd done before thinking about it. It was simply the easiest way, thought and intention without the verbal scaffold, and the feather went up and stayed up and rotated slowly at perfect height until he decided to put it down. Flitwick blinked at him from behind his desk. "You, without, Mr. Potter, could you?" "Sorry," Harry said. "Is the incantation required?" "For most students, yes. Well. Technically no, the verbal component simply focuses intent, it's not structurally necessary for someone who can." Flitwick looked like he was having a wonderful problem. "Would you mind attempting it again, with the incantation, so I can compare the—" Harry did it again. Flitwick made 3 rapid notes and beamed at him with the specific delight of an academic who had just encountered a genuinely interesting data point. Transfiguration with McGonagall, who transformed her desk into a pig and back without apparent effort and then evaluated the class with level, unimpressed eyes. Harry turned his match into a needle on the first attempt, clean silver, sharp and complete, and McGonagall stopped mid-stride across the room, turned back, picked it up, examined it, looked at Harry. "Do it again," she said. "With the matchbox." He turned the matchbox into a compass, then back, then into something else because transfiguration was interesting and he was enjoying the grammar of it, the way you thought about the relationship between objects rather than the objects themselves. McGonagall looked at him for a long moment, looked at the class, looked back at him. "Mr. Potter," she said, in a tone that was carefully and professionally neutral. "Come see me after class." The after-class conversation was brief and direct, which Harry appreciated because McGonagall was someone whose directness was immediately apparent and he had immediate respect for it. "How much have you studied?" she asked. "Some," Harry said honestly. "Olympus doesn't use wand magic the same way, so I came in without the technical framework. But the underlying logic of transfiguration is similar to things I've worked on before." "The underlying logic," McGonagall repeated. "Yes. It's about the relationship between forms rather than the forms themselves. The match isn't becoming a needle, the needle is what the match's purpose looks like in a different arrangement. If you think about it that way." McGonagall held up one hand. She looked at him with the expression of someone adjusting to something. "I believe," she said carefully, "that this class is going to require some adjustments." "I don't want special treatment," Harry said. "You're not going to get it," she said, which was the right answer, and he liked her significantly more for it. "What you're going to get is work that's actually appropriate for your level, which is a different thing." She looked at the compass that was still sitting on the desk. "Do you have difficulty with any aspect of transfiguration?" Harry thought about it. Animate to inanimate. I keep wanting things to be alive that shouldn't be. He paused. It seems wasteful to turn something living into something that can't want anything. McGonagall looked at him for a 3 count. That, she said, is an ethical position, not a technical one. Both things can be true, Harry said. McGonagall picked up the compass, tapped it once with her wand, and handed it back to him. Keep that, she said. And come back if the standard curriculum becomes insufficient. Harry pocketed it. What would be insufficient? We'll know when we get there, McGonagall said, and went back to her desk in the way of someone who had just encountered a genuinely interesting first year and was planning accordingly. Potions on Thursday was a different experience. Harry had read about Snape before arriving. Hera's briefing had included everyone relevant, and Snape had a file that was more complicated than most. Spy during the war. Dumbledore's man. Something else underneath both of those, personal and private, and apparently tangled up with Harry's parents in ways that the records were incomplete about. Harry had held this information lightly, the way you hold something you don't fully understand yet. The dungeon classroom had the specific atmosphere of a space that had been used for decades to impress upon students the importance of the person standing at the front of it. Snape entered without announcement, and the room went quiet in the instinctive way of a room that recognized it was now occupied by someone who used silence as a tool. He took attendance with the flat efficiency of someone performing a ritual he found beneath him, and then he stopped at Potter, and the pause had specific weight. Ah, yes, Snape said. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. He said it the way a blade is used when you want it to cut clean rather than hack. The class shifted with the uneasy attention of an audience watching someone get cut. Harry looked back at Snape with patient steadiness. He'd been looked at with a great deal of intent by gods who had agendas, and Snape's intent, however sharply deployed, registered at a significantly lower intensity. Mr. Potter. Snape moved between the desks with the economy of someone who had spent decades in this room. Let's see if our celebrity is as gifted as the legend suggests. He stopped at Harry's desk. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? The class held its breath. This was a first-year class. These were not first-year questions. Harry recognized asphodel and wormwood from Hera's curriculum, not potions as a formal study, but plants and their properties, which Hera had included because she believed a comprehensive education included things that were not part of standard curricula. The draught of living death, he said. One of the most powerful sleeping potions in existence. A beat. Snape's eyes were unreadable. Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? The stomach of a goat, Harry said. It's an antidote to most poisons. What is the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? They're the same plant, Harry said. Also called aconite. The name depends on context, wolfsbane in historical defensive uses, monkshood for its appearance, aconite in formal study. The class was entirely still. Hermione, 2 seats away, looked like someone watching a high-wire act and not sure whether to cheer or hold her breath. Snape looked at Harry for a long, measuring moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was not easily categorized. You've read the textbook, he said, and the inflection cut both ways, half dismissal, half something else. I read several, Harry said. Potions is interesting. The interaction between intention and process is, the chemistry does some of the work and the intention does the rest, and the ratio depends on the spell. It's similar to some things I've worked on before. Similar, Snape said. In structure. Not in execution. The execution here is more complex because the variables are more numerous. Harry looked at him steadily. I expect the practical work will be harder than the theory. Theory is just reading. Something shifted, very slightly, in Snape's expression. Not warmth. Not exactly. But the specific recalibration of someone encountering a student who is not performing intelligence but simply has it, and who is not trying to impress anyone, and whose admission of the limits of theory was more interesting than the display of knowing the answers. Snape moved away without another word, and his attention for the rest of the class was distributed across every student with the scrupulous even-handedness of someone who had committed, in this class at least, to professional conduct. Harry's potion was, at the end of the session, 2 grades ahead of where a first-year potion should be. Snape looked at it for a 3 count and wrote something in his register that Harry couldn't see. In the corridor afterward, Hermione appeared at his elbow with the expression of someone who had been waiting to say something for 40 minutes. "How did you know all of that?" "I studied," Harry said. "Everyone studied." "I studied. I didn't know the draft of living death off the top of my head." "I found the plant interactions particularly interesting," Harry said honestly. "I spent a week on them." Hermione looked at him with the evaluating sharpness of someone whose baseline measurement of intelligence is high and who has just encountered something that made her recalibrate the scale. "Can I study with you?" she asked, with the direct simplicity of someone who cut to the practical implication. "Yes," Harry said. "Neville too, if he wants." "He will," Hermione said, with the certainty of someone who had also done her research. "He loses confidence when he's being watched and gets it back when he's with people who don't need him to perform." Harry looked at her sideways. "You read people quite well." "I read," Hermione said, matter-of-factly. "Everything counts." Harry found this so fundamentally compatible with his own approach that he felt a specific kind of recognition that was entirely separate from the divine thread feeling. This was just a person he was going to get along with. "Library at 8, he said. 7, Hermione said, and walked ahead of him down the corridor with the decisive stride of someone whose schedule was already being arranged. The first weeks accumulated. He settled into Hogwarts the way he'd settled into Olympus, by paying attention, by being entirely himself, by letting the shape of the place reveal itself rather than pushing at it. The rhythm of classes and meals and the common room and the library after hours. Neville began to unfold, slowly and visibly, in direct proportion to how often Harry and Hermione treated him as competent rather than fragile. The first time Neville successfully transfigured his matchbox on the second try in a study session and looked up with quiet, contained triumph in his expression, Harry told him it was good work and meant it completely, and Neville sat taller for the rest of the evening. The Weasley twins adopted Harry with the energy of people who had recognized a kindred spirit and were not going to let the opportunity go. They appeared at unexpected moments with information, small experiments, and an ongoing assessment of every aspect of Hogwarts' social and physical landscape that Harry found genuinely useful. "Third floor corridor," Fred said one morning, appearing beside Harry on the path to charms. "Forbidden," said George from his other side. "Very forbidden," Fred agreed. "Fluffy amounts of forbidden." "What's on the 3rd floor?" Harry asked. "Big dog," George said. 3 heads. "Music helps," Fred added. Harry looked at both of them. "How do you know about the music?" The twins exchanged a glance with the elegant brevity of people who communicated mostly in partial information. "We have a map," Fred said. "Of Hogwarts. Everything. We'll show you sometime," Fred said. "If you're trustworthy," George added, which he said with the entirely unconvincing gravity of someone who trusted everyone interesting on principle. "I'm very trustworthy," Harry said. He said it without any hesitation, Fred observed. "Either that means it's true or he's very good," George said. "Both, probably," said Fred, and clapped Harry on the shoulder as they arrived at the charms classroom. Harry thought about the 3rd floor. A 3-headed dog was a Cerberus variant. He knew them from Olympus. Hades kept the original at the underworld gates and it was, in Harry's considered opinion, extremely unpleasant company. The fact that Hogwarts had one under a trapdoor guarding something suggested that Hogwarts had something worth guarding, which suggested that someone had recently moved something worth guarding here, which suggested that the something was in danger in its original location. He filed this and watched Quirrell. He'd been watching Quirrell since the first day. The turban was peculiar. The nervous energy was peculiar in the specific way of someone performing nervous energy rather than simply having it. There was a quality to it that was slightly off-tempo, like watching someone translate an emotion into behavior rather than simply experiencing it. And there was a smell, faint, that Harry caught when Quirrell passed close in the corridors, old magic, wrong-shaped, the specific flavor of magic that had been forced into something it wasn't designed to occupy. He knew what it was. He'd felt it before, in the Aegean storm. He'd felt it at the edge of his awareness through his scar, increasingly, as the weeks passed. He went back to Olympus for the first weekend at the end of September, which he'd arranged with Zeus and Hera as a regular thing rather than a final departure, and he told Zeus what he'd found. Zeus sat at the large table in his hall and listened without interrupting, which was a thing he'd learned to do over the 7 years since Harry arrived, because Harry's reporting was always more efficient if you let it run without interjection. "The professor," Zeus said, when Harry was done. "You're certain?" "I felt it in the first week. I've been confirming it since." Harry sat across from him, eating an olive because he'd missed Olympian food and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. "It's Voldemort. Or a piece of him. Occupying Quirrell somehow. The turban is covering something at the back of his head." He ate another olive. "And there's something under the school that he wants." "The Philosopher's Stone," Zeus said. Hera, from the side of the room where she'd been listening since the 5th sentence, made a quiet, sharp sound. "Flamel's stone. Dumbledore moved it to Hogwarts for protection 3 months ago. We had intelligence of it." "Right," Harry said. "Voldemort wants it because it makes the elixir of life. He wants a body that can't be killed." He looked at his father. "That's our problem." "Our problem," Zeus repeated. "Harry. I'm not waiting for him to try to take it. He's in the school. He's teaching my classmates." Harry's voice was flat and certain. "I'm going to sort it out." "You're 12, Hera said, from across the room. "You said that last year about the Aegean storms," Harry pointed out. "And I sorted those." Hera looked at Zeus. Zeus looked at Hera. The conversation that happened in 3 seconds of eye contact between two people who had been married for several thousand years was comprehensive and decisive. "We're not stopping you," Zeus said. "But you need to tell us when." "I was going to anyway," Harry said. "I just wanted to make sure I understood it fully first." "And do you?" "Not yet. There's still something I don't know." Quirrell's had access to the stone's location for months. "Why hasn't he moved yet?" Harry turned the olive pit in his fingers. "There's a trap. Something between him and it. And I think Dumbledore put it there, but I'm not sure it's just to stop Voldemort." The fire in the hall crackled. Hera sat down. "Dumbledore," she said, carefully. "He knows I'm here," Harry said. "He's known since the sorting. The hat told me something registered differently and Dumbledore was watching with the specific attention of someone receiving a confirmation. He knows something about me and he's filing it. He hasn't approached me directly, he asks McGonagall questions about me through her reports, and he arranged for my Quidditch trial." "You're what?" Hera said. "Oh," Harry said. There's a game. McGonagall put me on the team. I'm quite good at it." "Harry. The point is," Harry continued, "Dumbledore is managing information about me the same way he manages everything, carefully, strategically, with a very long view. He's not an enemy. But he's not going to be straight with me either, and I think his plan for the stone involves me in ways he hasn't told me about." Zeus looked at Harry for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "Handle it on my own terms," Harry said, simply. "Before Dumbledore's plan comes into play. Before Quirrell gets what he needs." He looked up. "Voldemort is in my school. He killed my parents. I'm 12 and I'm a god and he is a fragment of a broken soul in a borrowed body." He was not angry when he said this, not heated, not performed. Just certain, the way the sky was certain about lightning. "He's not a match for me and he probably knows it, and I'd like to deal with it quickly so everyone in Gryffindor Common Room stops having nightmares about him." Hera put her hand over his. "Clean." Quickly. Come back to us after. Always, Harry said. The night Harry chose was the first week of November, because by then he had everything he needed. He'd spent October mapping the protection sequences below the third-floor corridor, not by going through them but by feeling them from above, the way you feel a current below a surface. There were 7 layers. Flammel's fire. Snape's potions. McGonagall's chess. More. And at the furthest layer, something that Dumbledore had constructed that was designed to be passed by desire rather than power, something that would show a person the stone only if they wanted to find it but not to use it. That specific construction, Harry thought, was designed for one person in mind. Someone who had the mirror of Erist in their background, whose desires had been specifically shaped toward the stone. Someone Dumbledore had been watching and preparing, perhaps without that someone knowing, as an unwitting participant in a plan whose real function was to bring a particular outcome about. He was not going to be an unwitting participant. He went at 2 in the morning, not through the trapdoor but down through the castle itself, moving through stone the way he'd learned to move through weather, by understanding the language of it rather than forcing the matter. He arrived at the bottom chamber not through the trap sequence but beside it, a distinction that mattered because the traps couldn't be triggered by something that hadn't gone through the trigger points. The final chamber had the mirror and the stone and Quirrell. Quirrell heard him arrive and turned, and his face did the thing that was half Quirrell's habitual anxiety and half something else, something older and colder, looking out through Quirrell's eyes like a person looking through a window. "Potter," Quirrell said. "And then, you shouldn't be here." "Here's the thing about that," Harry said, standing at the edge of the chamber, "you're in my school and you've been there for months and I've been patient about it. That's done now." The voice that came from behind Quirrell's head, muffled by the turban, resonant with the specific quality of something that had once been enormous and was now compressed into very little, said, "Harry Potter." "How unexpected." "Is it really?" Harry said. "You're a child. You keep saying that. I'm a god. The child part is incidental." He looked at Quirrell. "Remove the turban." Quirrell's hands moved to the turban with the jerky compliance of someone whose body isn't entirely theirs, and it unraveled, and at the back of Quirrell's head was a face, pale and flat and snake-like, red-eyed, the face of someone who had done terrible things to their own humanity in pursuit of something they decided was worth it. Voldemort looked at Harry with those red eyes and there was, underneath the cold menace of him, something Harry had not expected, genuine assessment. Not arrogance. Not dismissal. The actual, careful evaluation of something that recognized a real variable. "You've grown considerably from what I expected," Voldemort said. "You've shrunk considerably from what you were," Harry said. "Give me the stone, Potter. It's of no use to you." "I'm immortal," Harry said. "You're right, it's of no use to me." He looked at the mirror, which was showing him, he glanced, nothing in particular. Or rather, something that wasn't the stone, because he didn't want the stone, he just wanted to deal with this. "I'm not going to give it to you." "Then we fight," said Voldemort, and Quirrell moved. He was fast, faster than a professor had any right to be, moving with the doubled speed of a body driven by something that had been a very powerful wizard. Fire gathered in his hands, dark fire, the kind that had the particular quality of destruction without light, that burned without illuminating. Harry moved sideways and the fire missed by 3 feet and the stone wall behind him didn't fare well. He didn't raise a weapon. He raised his hand and the lightning came, not a bolt, not a strike, but a sustained arc, precise and white, the same kind of thing he'd developed in the training yards, worn rather than thrown, and it hit Quirrell across the chest and the man flew backward and hit the far wall and slid down it and lay very still. Silence. The chamber smelled like lightning and spent magic. "That's it?" Voldemort said from Quirrell's still face. His voice had lost none of its control. "You struck him down without, he's not dead," Harry said. "He's unconscious. There's a difference." He walked across the chamber to the mirror and looked at himself in it. His reflection looked back with the one-eared lion under its arm, which was clearly his mind's idea of humor. You're not going to get the stone. Quirrell is going to wake up in the hospital wing. You're going to leave this school. You cannot command me, child. I'm not commanding you, Harry said. He turned from the mirror and looked at the face on the back of Quirrell's head, at Voldemort, fragment and remnant, what remained of a man who had torn his own soul apart in the service of a terror of death that Harry found genuinely sad in the way that only deeply foolish things were sad. I'm telling you what's going to happen, because that's what is going to happen. He paused. You killed my parents. Voldemort's red eyes were still. I did. I know. Harry looked at him the way he looked at things he was fully decided about. We're going to finish this eventually. Not tonight, you're barely a thing tonight, you're a face on someone else's skull, and dealing with you properly requires you to be a proper problem. But I want you to know, so there's no confusion later, I know what you are and I know what you did and I am not afraid of you. I am not going to be maneuvered into anything. And when the time comes, I'm going to end it cleanly. He said none of this with heat or performance. He said it the way you say things that are simply true. The red eyes looked at him and Harry had the distinct impression that Voldemort, who was genuinely intelligent even in this diminished form, was doing the same calculation Harry had done in the storm over the Aegean, feeling for the nature of the thing in front of him, trying to understand its full shape. What he found in Harry was not a child with gifts. It was not a symbol or a weapon or a boy carrying a prophecy like a burden. It was a god who happened to also be a 12-year-old, who was entirely comfortable with what he was, who had love and family and a mountain of lightning behind him and who looked at Voldemort with no fear whatsoever, not because he was pretending but because fear of this was not something he had. Voldemort said nothing. Then the face went slack, and a shadow, thin, cold, the shape of a thing without a body, peeled away from Quirrell's head and moved through the chamber wall and was gone. The chamber was very quiet. Quirrell's body breathed steadily. He'd have a headache and no memory and, Harry suspected, his own self back, for whatever that was worth. Harry looked at the mirror. He looked at the stone that had appeared in the reflection's pocket and that had not appeared in his actual pocket, which confirmed what he'd suspected about how the enchantment worked. He reached out and touched the mirror's frame. Tell Dumbledore, he said to no one in particular, though he was fairly sure the castle was listening, that the problem is handled. And that the stone should go somewhere safer. Like back to Flamel. He walked out of the chamber and up through the castle the same way he'd come, and stopped in a bathroom to rinse dust from his hands, and went back to Gryffindor Tower and got into bed and slept very well. Dumbledore's office smelled like lemon drops and parchment and something older underneath both of those, the deep specific smell of a mind that had been thinking about very long games for a very long time. Harry had been invited. Not summoned, invited, with the particular phrasing that made a distinction between the two, which Harry had noted and which meant Dumbledore was careful about how he established the opening terms of conversations. He sat across from the headmaster on a Wednesday morning 2 days after the chamber event, and Fawkes the Phoenix was on his perch and making the specific quiet sound that phoenixes made when they were paying attention, and Harry sat with his hands in his lap and waited. Dumbledore looked at him over his half-moon glasses with those eyes that were warm and measuring simultaneously. "How are you, Harry?" "Fine," Harry said. "Thank you. I understand there was some activity below the school on Monday evening." "There was," Harry agreed. "Would you like to tell me about it?" "Professor Quirrell was possessed by Voldemort," Harry said. "Voldemort wanted the Philosopher's Stone. I went down and prevented that. Quirrell is in the hospital wing. Voldemort has left the school." He paused. "The stone should go back to Nicholas Flamel. It's safer with him, and Voldemort knows where it is now." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. His expression had not changed, the warmth was still there, the kindness was still there, and underneath them, Harry could see very clearly, was the particular controlled response of someone whose plan had been departed from in ways they hadn't expected and were now rapidly recalculating. "You've been busy," Dumbledore said. "It was quick," Harry said. "Quick," Dumbledore repeated, very mildly. "I see." He looked at Harry with the full weight of that considerable attention. Harry. You handled a situation that I had, that several adults had worked hard to prepare for. I know, Harry said. And I'm not trying to undermine anyone's preparation. But Voldemort was in the school, in a professor, teaching my classmates. The situation needed handling, and I could handle it, so I did. He met Dumbledore's eyes steadily. I hope that's all right with you. I also hope you understand that my handling of situations isn't something I'll be asking permission for. The silence had a specific quality. Dumbledore looked at him for a long, thoughtful moment. The warmth in his eyes was real, Harry thought, it was genuine, it was not a performance. But there was also something else there, something that was doing rapid and comprehensive work in the background, and Harry thought, this is a man who has managed things for a very long time, and he has just encountered something that is genuinely outside his management style. You are very much your mother's son, Dumbledore said. And your father's. Thank you, Harry said, and meant it. And something else besides, Dumbledore continued, and the way he said it meant he was asking without asking. Yes, Harry said simply. Another beat. The gods, Dumbledore said, and it wasn't really a question but it wasn't a confirmation either, it was the careful midpoint of someone who had a theory and was testing whether the theory's subject would confirm it. My family, Harry said. Yes. Dumbledore folded his hands. He looked out the window. He looked at Fawkes, who trilled once, low and clear. I had a plan, he said, and the honesty of this seemed to cost him something, a small thing, barely visible, the cost of admitting planning to the subject of the plan. For you. For this situation. I know, Harry said. The mirror was the last layer. It was designed for someone who'd approach it a specific way. Someone whose desire structure you'd been following. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not angry about it. I understand why you'd planned carefully. You've been managing very difficult things for a long time and your instinct is to manage them rather than trust them. He paused. But I'm not going to be managed. I'll work with you, I'll share information, and I'll listen when you have something important to say. What I won't do is be a piece in someone else's plan. Fawkes made a long, descending sound that could have been anything. Dumbledore looked at Harry with something that was, very specifically and visibly, not what he'd expected. Then he said, you are, perhaps, the most unusual student I have encountered in a century of teaching. I'll take that, Harry said. I mean it as a great compliment. I know, Harry said. I know you mean it sincerely. That's why I'm not being rude about the plan thing. Dumbledore's mouth moved in something that was the beginning of a smile. Not the performance warmth smile. A genuine one. I think, he said, slowly, that I have been presented with a new problem, which is not something I encounter often and which I find, despite myself, rather refreshing. Good, Harry said. I'm available for conversations anytime you want to have an actual one. He stood, straightened his robes, and left the office, and Dumbledore sat behind his desk and looked at the door for a long time after Harry had gone. Fawkes ruffled his feathers once and made the sound he made when something had gone, on balance, well. Hermione found out in December. It wasn't a dramatic revelation. Harry hadn't been hiding, he'd been honest about being adopted by Zeus and Hera when anyone asked where he'd been for 10 years, and most people had either not asked or had taken it as an eccentric answer without fully processing it. Hermione, who processed everything fully, had been sitting on several questions that she'd been assembling into a coherent pattern for 3 months. They were in the library at 9 at night, half an hour before curfew, and Hermione put down her quill and said, without preamble, "You're actually a god." Harry looked up from his essay. Yes. She looked at him for a moment. God of thunder and magic. Thunder and magic, she repeated. Those two things together are, I know. And the lightning you do without a wand, yes. And the weather in the library that one time, that was frustration with irregular Greek verbs, Harry said. I'm better at it now. Hermione processed all of this with visible efficiency, like a very fast machine cycling through implications. Does Dumbledore know? He suspects. Do the teachers know? Flitwick suspects. McGonagall suspects. Snape knows something is different, but he's decided to treat me exactly the same regardless, which I actually respect. Harry looked at her. Are you alarmed? No, Hermione said, with the brisk honesty of someone who'd already done the emotional processing during the logical processing. I'm calibrating. There's a difference. She picked up her quill. Does it change how you see people? The mortal versus God thing? Harry thought about this genuinely. No. Mortals are interesting. Mortals make choices without infinite time, which makes the choices matter differently. Athena says that's one of the things about humans she finds most. Actually, you'd get along with Athena. Athena, Hermione said. As in, goddess of wisdom, war strategy, and scholarship, Harry said. Yes. She'd like you. You both process information the same way. Hermione's mouth did something that was very clearly not a smile because she had decided not to react to that compliment. Okay, she said, and went back to her essay with slightly heightened color in her cheeks and slightly faster quill strokes. Neville, who had come in 10 minutes ago and had sat down and been reading quietly, said, from behind his herbology textbook, I already knew. The lightning thing in charms made it obvious. He looked over the top of the book with his steady, kind eyes. It's fine. You're still the same person. Harry looked at him. You could have said something. I was waiting to see if it was relevant, Neville said, and went back to herbology with the unshakable practicality of someone who had decided that the most important things were usually the most straightforward ones. The library was quiet around them, and the candles burned steady, and outside the windows the first snow of winter was beginning to fall on Hogwarts, and Harry Potter, god of thunder and magic, sat between his two best friends and wrote an essay on switching spells and felt, with uncomplicated clarity, exactly where he was supposed to be. Chapter 4, The World Beneath the World. The second year started with a car. Harry heard about it before he saw it, Fred and George telling the story with the particular relish of people who had participated in something genuinely ill-advised and were proud of it in the specific way you're proud of things that turned out fine. A flying Ford Anglia. Their brother Ron and Harry's friend Hermione had been trying to reach the Hogwarts Express and missed it, and the car had seemed like the obvious solution, and now there were 2 second years arriving at school via bewitched vehicle crash landing in the Whomping Willow at 11 at night. Harry was in the Gryffindor common room when they came through the portrait hole, scraped and tired and carrying their owls, and Hermione's expression was the specific one she wore when she was very relieved about something and was converting the relief into controlled irritation to deal with it. You're alive, Harry said. Barely, Hermione said, dropping into a chair. The car dropped our trunks on us from 30 feet. And the tree. She looked at Ron, who had a scratch across his cheek and was checking his wand with frantic care. This is Ron Weasley. Ron looked up from his wand. He was tall and gangly with the Weasley red hair, and he looked at Harry with the particular expression of someone who had heard a lot about a person and was now recalibrating the gap between the heard version and the actual one. Fred and George talk about you constantly, he said. I've heard, Harry said. Is your wand all right? Ron looked at it. The tip was cracked. Not really, he admitted. Snapped against the tree. He swished it experimentally and it emitted a sound like a wet sneeze. My mum's going to, he stopped. Reconsidered. My mum is going to know about this before breakfast, isn't she? The school will have sent an owl, Harry confirmed. Ron closed his eyes briefly. Harry, Hermione said, in the tone she used when she'd been thinking about something since before the crash and was finally getting to say it, there were barriers at King's Cross. The entrance to platform 9 3/4. We couldn't get through. Someone sealed them, Harry said. Both of them looked at him. I felt it from here, Harry said. 11:30, a specific kind of closing magic. I was going to look into it. He looked at his friends. It wasn't accidental and it wasn't Hogwarts. Someone from outside the school sealed a platform and stranded 2 second years. He leaned back. That's someone who knew you'd be there and wanted you not to get on the train. Who would? Ron started. Don't know yet, Harry said. Get some sleep. We'll start thinking about it in the morning. Ron blinked at him, then looked at Hermione, then back at Harry, with the expression of someone who had expected to be told off and instead received a mission briefing. Right, he said. Okay. Third bed on the left, Harry said. It's empty. Ron Weasley went up the stairs and Hermione exchanged a look that did a lot of work in a short time. He's good, Hermione said quietly. He's just never had anyone treat him as if he's competent without also making him feel like the least important Weasley. He's the 6th of 7, Harry said. That's a complicated position. You read a lot of psychology for a god. Hera, Harry said simply, which explained everything. The second year was louder than the first. Not in a bad way, in the way that things get louder when they have more people in them, more moving parts, more overlapping stories. Ron joined their study group and brought with him a knowledge of wizarding history and culture that was entirely experiential rather than textbook-based, which Hermione found maddening and Harry found invaluable. Ron knew things about the wizarding world the way you know the inside of your own house, not because he'd studied it but because he'd lived it, and that kind of knowledge had texture that books couldn't replicate. He also played chess with a ferocity that Harry found genuinely impressive. The board was alive for Ron in a way that other things weren't, and watching him play was like watching someone speak their native language, fluent and instinctive and entirely themselves. You're calculating 6 moves ahead, Harry said once, watching. 8, Ron said, not looking up. Sometimes 10. But you don't look like you're calculating. Doesn't feel like it, Ron said, taking Harry's knight with calm satisfaction. Feels like hearing. He looked up briefly. You do that with lightning, don't you? It doesn't feel like thinking. Harry looked at the board. Ron had just set up a check that wouldn't be visible for 4 moves. Yes, Harry said. Exactly like that. Ron nodded, as if this confirmed something, and went back to the board. The new defense against the dark arts teacher arrived on the first day with the particular energy of someone who had prepared very extensively to be impressive. Gilderoy Lockhart was handsome in the curated way of someone who had spent considerable time on it, and his classroom was wallpapered with his own image in various dramatic poses, and he smiled with the completeness of someone who had mastered smiling as a performance art. He called on Harry in the first class to answer a question about banishing jinxes, presumably expecting to demonstrate Harry's ignorance against his own expertise, and Harry answered accurately and completely and with a specific additional note about the underlying structure of banishing magic that Lockhart received with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Quite right, Lockhart said. Thank you, Harry said pleasantly. Hermione wrote something in her margin with underlined force. Ron looked straight ahead with elaborate neutrality. Harry watched Lockhart with patient attention and noted that the man's wand came out of his pocket with the ease of someone comfortable with it but that his eyes moved away from practical demonstrations in the way of someone who preferred theory to practice, and theory for reasons that had nothing to do with intellectual preference. He was a fraud. Harry had this conclusion within 40 minutes. He held it lightly, as a working theory, and accumulated evidence over the following weeks with the thoroughness of someone who had learned from Hera that conclusions formed quickly should be verified slowly. The evidence was not subtle. By mid-October he was certain. He told Hermione. I know, she said, without looking up from her book. Since when? 2nd week. His books don't cite sources. His accounts of events use journalistic structures that describe things in the third person even when he's supposedly present, which means he wrote them from second-hand accounts. And his wand work in class is always theoretical, never demonstrated. She turned a page. He's taken credit for other people's achievements. The question is how many and whose. All of them, I think, Harry said. Hermione set her book down. How do you know? I asked Hermes to pull records. He thinks it's amusing enough to actually help. Harry looked at the book in front of him. Every magical creature or dark force Lockhart claims to have dealt with, there's a corresponding unsolved case in the Ministry's books that was actually resolved by someone else. He tracks the resolution, finds the person, does something to their memory, and publishes. Hermione stared at him. He's a memory charm specialist. The best kind of fraud is one who removes the evidence, Harry said. We have to do something about this. Yes, Harry agreed. But carefully. Because if we expose him now, Hogwarts loses a defense teacher mid-year and the students learn less, which is the opposite of the goal. He looked at her. We monitor. And when it becomes a liability rather than just an embarrassment, we move. Hermione looked at him with the expression she sometimes had of someone watching a chess game being played several levels above her current view. You've already thought about when? When the creature problem starts, Harry said. Because there will be a creature problem. There's always something in second year, the school has a cycle, you can feel it in the magic of the building. Whatever it is, Lockhart will be useless about it and we'll need to handle it ourselves, and at that point the facade comes down naturally. He was right, and the creature problem announced itself in November. The writing appeared on the wall outside the second-floor girls' bathroom on the 3rd of November, in something that was red and smelled metallic and was definitely not paint. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the heir, beware. Mrs. Norris, Filch's cat, was hanging stunned from a torch bracket nearby. The Halloween feast had just ended. Half the school was clustered in the corridor looking at it. Harry stood at the edge of the crowd and looked at the writing and felt the specific quality of old magic underneath it, deep school magic, the kind that went back to Hogwarts' founding, which he'd felt in the stones since the first week but that was now resonating with something activated, something that had been waiting. Dumbledore appeared and his expression, underneath the careful management of it, showed something Harry had only seen once before, the specific quality of a problem he had hoped would not emerge in this timeline. Several other teachers arrived. Snape looked at Harry with the flat, evaluating attention he used when he was filing information. McGonagall looked at the writing with controlled alarm. Lockhart arrived and announced loudly that he knew exactly what this was and had dealt with it twice before, and Harry watched Snape's upper lip move in a way that suggested that Snape agreed with Harry's assessment of Lockhart on at least this point. What is it? Ron asked, beside him. Something old, Harry said. Salazar Slytherin built a chamber somewhere in the school. The legend says he left a monster inside to purge Hogwarts of Muggle-born students when his heir returned. He looked at the writing. Someone has either opened it or wants everyone to think they have. That's a horrible legend, Ron said. Most founding legends are, Harry said. The question is whether it's actually open or whether it's being used. Used how? As a threat. A symbol. Something to frighten people with. Harry looked at Mrs. Norris, still suspended, and extended his awareness briefly, gently, minimally, just enough to feel the quality of whatever had affected her. Cold magic. Old. The signature of something massive and reptilian and deeply unpleasant. Actually open, he revised. Something came through here tonight. Ron stepped closer. Can you feel it? Not precisely. But something was here. Something that moves through the school in ways that shouldn't be physically possible. He looked at the ceiling. Through the walls. Through the pipes. He paused. Parseltongue. What? The chamber responds to Parseltongue. Slytherin's language. Harry looked at Ron. I speak it. I have since I was 9, it came with the magic inheritance. I've never particularly used it because snakes aren't generally the most stimulating conversationalists, but, you speak snake, Ron said. Among other things. Fred did not mention that. Fred doesn't know everything, Harry said. Ron absorbed this and said, after a moment, is that going to be helpful? Potentially very, Harry said. The chamber was not, ultimately, as difficult to find as 11 centuries of mystery suggested it should be. Harry spent 2 days thinking about it from the perspective of a founder who was also a parselmouth and who had built something intended to be found by another parselmouth rather than hidden from everyone. If the chamber was keyed to Parseltongue, then its entrance would be something that responded to the language, a surface, a marking, something that looked like decoration to everyone else. He went through the castle methodically. Not by looking but by listening, extending his awareness for the ambient magical signatures that he'd mapped in his first weeks and noting anything that resonated with the old snake magic quality of whatever had moved through the second-floor corridor. He found it in the second-floor girls' bathroom on the 4th day. The sinks. Specifically, the central sink, which had a small etched serpent on the tap that most people looked at and saw as decoration. Harry crouched in front of it and looked at the serpent and said, in Parseltongue, the word that roughly translated as open, and felt the sink begin to move. Hermione was behind him. Ron was at the bathroom door keeping watch. They discussed this. Harry had told them what he was going to do and neither of them had suggested staying behind, which he'd expected from Hermione and had found gratifying from Ron, who was still occasionally surprised by his own courage. It's a pipe, Hermione said, looking at the now open shaft. It's a very long pipe, Harry confirmed, looking down. How far down? He sent a brief pulse of his awareness down the shaft and felt the bottom, cold stone, running water, old magic, the thickness of centuries. Far. They went down. Ron made a sound on the way that was half genuine alarm and half the sound of someone deciding to be fine about things, and Hermione made no sound at all because she was cataloging. The Chamber of Secrets was extraordinary. Harry had been in Olympus's deepest halls. He had walked with Zeus through places built when the world was younger and stranger. He had a reasonably calibrated sense of impressive architecture. And the Chamber of Secrets, with its stone serpent columns and the cathedral drip of ancient water and the particular quality of a space that had been sealed for 1100 years and was still, full of the intention of the person who built it, was extraordinary. The basilisk was at the far end. It was enormous. Harry had known it would be enormous. Basilisks of the founding era were different creatures from their modern descendants, fed on the magic of a school for a millennium, but enormous didn't quite cover it. It was immense in the way that mountains were immense, less a specific object and more a geographical feature. It was also blind. Harry had anticipated this. Something that killed with eye contact would need a blindfolded host, whoever was directing it couldn't afford the gaze either. The basilisk had its eyes shut, moving by smell and sound and the vibrations of the chamber floor, and Harry felt the control structure on it before he saw it clearly. A binding that ran from the chamber's foundations up through the school and terminated in something on the upper floors that was acting as a remote anchor point. Don't look at its eyes if they open, Harry said to Hermione and Ron. Look at your feet. Noted, Hermione said, extremely quietly. Very noted, Ron said, almost inaudibly. Harry moved forward and the basilisk felt him, felt the weight of divine magic in the stone under its belly, and raised its head, and it said, in Parseltongue, the hissing attention of something very old and very powerful waking up, who walks here? Harry Potter, Harry said. God of thunder and magic. Son of Zeus. A pause. The basilisk processed this with the specific slow gravity of something whose time frame was centuries. The small gods have not walked here before. I know. Who controls you? A memory. Old paper. A name. Whose name? He who made this place. He who speaks. A book, then. Or a diary. Something old enough to have a piece of Slytherin's, no. Not Slytherin. The chamber was Slytherin's but the binding on the basilisk was newer, much newer, a different signature. The same rotting color quality he'd felt in Quirrell, in the Aegean storms, in the dark thing at the edge of his awareness. Voldemort, Harry said. Not in Parseltongue, in English, to himself. There's a Horcrux somewhere in this school, he said aloud. Hermione's sharp intake of breath was very small. Are you certain? The basilisk is being controlled by something that's a fragment of the same soul as the thing that was in Quirrell. Someone planted it here. He looked at the basilisk, which had gone still, listening. It's been activated, someone found the Horcrux and used it. Someone here, in the school, is feeding the thing that controls the basilisk without knowing what they're holding. Someone opened the chamber, Ron said slowly. But maybe they didn't know, the diary, Harry said. Someone found a very old diary and it spoke to them. And they didn't know what it was. He said to the basilisk, in Parseltongue, I am going to break the binding. You will be free. What you do with freedom is your choice. But you won't be used. The basilisk regarded him for a long moment with those closed, enormous eyes. Then it said, you are different from what comes through here. Yes. The other one is afraid. The memory. It hides fear under names. A pause. You do not. No, Harry said. I don't. He reached for the binding, felt the full architecture of it, the chain running from the chamber through the school to wherever the diary currently was, and pulled it apart the same way he'd pulled apart the Aegean storm anchor. Cleanly. Decisively. The binding snapped and the basilisk flinched, a shudder that ran through its entire enormous length, and then it was still. Then it turned and moved away through the chamber, deeper, toward a darkness at the far end that suggested tunnels that ran out of the school entirely, and was gone. Harry turned to Hermione and Ron. Ron had the expression of someone who had just watched something that was going to take a week to fully process. Hermione was already thinking ahead, which he recognized from her eyes. The diary, she said. Someone in the school has it, Harry said. Or had it. They might not even know what it is. Voldemort would have designed it to seem like a normal diary, just one that talked back. He thought of who had been near the second-floor bathroom, who had been acting strangely, who had access to things they shouldn't. Ginny Weasley, he said. Ron went very still. She's been, Harry chose words carefully. She's been tired. I noticed it starting in September. Writing in something she kept hidden. The thing in the diary would have been talking to her, feeding on her, using her magical energy to rematerialize. He looked at Ron. She didn't know. She had no way of knowing. Ron's jaw was tight. We find the diary. We destroy it. Harry looked at the chamber, at the stone serpents, at the dark water moving through the floor. Then we have a conversation with whoever sent it to her. Ron's eyes were bright with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear. Who sent it? Harry thought about the magical signature. Thought about who in the wizarding world would have access to a Voldemort Horcrux, would know what it was, and would deliberately put it in the hands of an 11-year-old girl. The answer formed with the unpleasant clarity of a conclusion you'd been avoiding. Someone who's been collecting dark artifacts for years, he said. Someone who has publicly distanced himself from Voldemort but whose distance has always had the quality of strategic convenience rather than genuine opposition. He looked at Ron. Someone who's been watching your family very carefully for a long time. Ron's expression moved through several things. Then, Malfoy, he said. Lucius Malfoy. I think so. At Flourish and Blots, before term, you told me about the confrontation. He slipped something into Ginny's cauldron. I think that was when. Ron stood very still in the Chamber of Secrets and breathed steadily and said nothing, which Harry recognized as the behavior of someone deciding how to be about something before they let themselves feel it. Then, we get the diary first. Yes, Harry said. And then we deal with Malfoy through the right channels, evidence, witnesses, ministry records of the artifact. That's how it holds. What if the right channels don't work? Harry looked at him steadily. Then we escalate, he said. But we try the right channels first. Because Hermione's safety and your sister's recovery and the school's stability all benefit from this going through proper process if it can. He paused. And if it can't, I am a god and Lucius Malfoy is a man with a cane, and I think we know how that resolves. Ron looked at him for a moment and then exhaled, a long, controlled breath that released a lot of things at once. Yeah, he said. All right. Ginny Weasley sat in the hospital wing with color slowly returning to her face, and she looked like someone who had been very far away and had just come back and wasn't entirely sure of the difference between where she'd been and where she was. Harry sat beside her bed. Hermione was at the door, keeping watch. Ron had gone to get Madame Pomfrey 20 minutes ago and come back with her and then been firmly and kindly removed from the immediate vicinity on the grounds that hovering was not helpful, which was something that Madame Pomfrey said with the authority of someone who had been dealing with hovering for 30 years. Ginny looked at Harry with her enormous brown eyes and said, I don't remember most of it. I know, Harry said. I was writing to him and he was writing back and then, she stopped. Did I hurt people? Mrs. Norris. A few students who were stunned. Harry held her gaze. None of it was you. You were being used. That's different. It doesn't feel different, she said, very quietly. I know, he said again. But it is. The difference matters even when it doesn't feel like it does. He looked at the window, at the late autumn sky. Someone gave you that diary knowing exactly what it was and what it would do. That's on them. Every bit of it. Ginny was quiet. Then, you destroyed it? Yes. He'd found it in Ginny's dormitory, tucked under a loose floorboard, and he'd done what the research suggested. Basilisk venom would destroy a Horcrux, and the chamber had left enough venom on the floor from the basilisk's passage that soaking the diary in it had been efficient, if messy. The diary had screamed, in Voldemort's voice, compressed and furious, and then been silent, and the soul fragment in it had dissipated with the flat finality of something that had never had the right to exist. Is he gone? From me? Ginny asked. He's gone, Harry said. You're entirely yourself again. Ginny exhaled. The sound of it was enormous, weeks of wrongness leaving all at once, and her eyes filled up and she let them, and Harry didn't look away or make it smaller, just sat there while she cried with the simple steadiness of someone who understood that being present was the thing required. When she was done she wiped her face with the hospital blanket and said, Ron's outside, isn't he? Yes. He'll make it weird. Probably, Harry agreed. Can you tell him I'm okay before he comes in? So he spends less time trying to make a face that doesn't show he's been crying in the corridor. Harry stood. I'll tell him, he said. At the door he turned back. Ginny. You're tougher than this thing. You always were. That's why it had to work so hard. She looked at him with the expression of someone receiving something they needed and deciding to believe it. Then she nodded, once, and Harry went out to tell Ron his sister was fine. The conversation with Dumbledore this time happened in a room with more people in it. McGonagall was there. Snape was there, which meant he knew more than he'd let on about several things and had been waiting for an opportunity to confirm them. Pomfrey stood near the door. And Dumbledore sat at his desk with his hands folded and his expression doing the same multi-layered work it always did. Harry had brought the charred remains of the diary and set them on the desk without ceremony. Tom Riddle's diary, Dumbledore said, looking at it. Where did you find this? Ginny Weasley's dormitory, Harry said. It was given to her at Flourish and Blots before term. I believe by Lucius Malfoy. He sat down. It's a Horcrux. The room was very still. That is a significant claim, Snape said, in the measured voice he used when he was saying things very carefully. I know what a Horcrux is, Harry said. I know what they feel like, I've felt the same signature before. Quirrell last year. The Aegean storms. The Scar connection. He touched his forehead briefly. Voldemort split his soul. This was one of the pieces. There are more. Dumbledore looked at the diary for a long time. The look had the quality of someone seeing a confirmation of something they'd feared for years. You are correct, he said, finally. He looked up. How many more do you believe there are? I don't know yet, Harry said. But based on the magical degradation pattern I felt in each one, I'd estimate several. Possibly as many as 6 total fragments plus whatever remains in his current form. He looked at Dumbledore. I think you have more information about this than I do. A pause. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said. I'd like to hear them. Snape's eyebrows moved fractionally upward. McGonagall's expression was that of someone watching a student she'd already considered exceptional reset her understanding of the scale. Dumbledore looked at Harry across the desk, at this 12-year-old child who sat with the settled ease of someone who had been in important rooms before and found them unintimidating, and made a decision that Harry could see him making, a recalibration of approach. Not the managed warmth. Something more direct. I believe there were 6 Horcruxes, Dumbledore said. I believe some have already been identified or will be. And I believe that the most dangerous one is also the most difficult because it is involuntary. He held Harry's gaze. You already know what I mean. The scar, Harry said. The night Voldemort's curse reflected, a piece of him attached itself to you. Not by his design. By accident of the magic involved. Dumbledore's voice was even, but there was something underneath it that was not entirely even, the specific quality of a man saying something he has been dreading saying. A piece of Voldemort's soul has been inside you since you were 15 months old. The room was very quiet. Harry sat with this. He turned it over. He looked at it from its angles. He thought about the rotting color thing at the edge of his awareness that he'd been walling off since he was 6 years old. He thought about what he knew about soul magic from the Olympian archives, which were considerably more comprehensive on this topic than the wizarding world's resources. He thought about the relationship between a Horcrux and an immortal host. It can't survive in me long term, he said. Dumbledore blinked. I beg your pardon. A soul fragment requires a living mortal host to anchor in. The anchor is death. The implicit mortality of the vessel is what holds a Horcrux in place. It's designed for something that can die. Harry met Dumbledore's eyes. I'm immortal. I've been immortal since I was 5. The fragment in my scar has been gradually losing its anchor for 7 years. By my estimate it's already significantly weaker than when it attached. He paused. The wall I built is probably not even necessary anymore. But I keep it because the feeling is unpleasant. The silence in the office was a specific kind, the kind that happens when a problem that has been carrying enormous weight for years turns out to have a solution that nobody thought to look for because they approached it from the wrong angle. Snape said, very quietly, you've been passively destroying a Horcrux for 7 years. Apparently, Harry said. McGonagall made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Dumbledore looked at Harry across his desk for a very long moment. The warmth in his eyes was real, and so was the complicated thing underneath it, the thing that was part relief and part the specific feeling of realizing that a plan you'd been building for decades was not necessary because the solution had been walking around in the subject all along. Harry, he said, and his voice was different from every other time he'd said it. I owe you an apology. Harry looked at him. He waited. I have been planning, Dumbledore said, for a very long time, around an assumption I should have questioned earlier. The assumption that you would need to die. He said it plainly, which cost him something visible. My understanding of Horcrux magic suggested that the fragment in you could only be destroyed with you. That eventually, to fully defeat Voldemort, you would have to, he stopped. Walk into death, Harry said. Yes. Harry thought about this for a moment. He thought about what that plan had looked like from Dumbledore's end, the long game of preparing someone, carefully, for a sacrifice that the someone wouldn't fully understand until the moment. He thought about the first year and the mirror and the way Dumbledore had built his protections. He thought about the weight that a person would carry who genuinely believed they were doing the kindest and most necessary terrible thing. You were trying to make it gentle, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes. That's, Harry paused. I think you were wrong to plan it that way. You could have told me. You could have asked. He held Dumbledore's gaze steadily, not with anger, but with the specific honest directness that was just who he was. But I think you believed it was necessary and you were trying to carry the weight of it yourself. And he looked for the word, that's not nothing. Dumbledore was very still. I'm not going to have to die, Harry said. The fragment's already failing. I'll purge it properly when it's weak enough to move, a few months, probably. And then that piece is gone and Voldemort loses an anchor he doesn't even know he has. He stood. The others, the remaining Horcruxes, I'd like to work on those with you. Actually with you. Not as a piece in a plan, but as a partner. Dumbledore looked at him for the longest moment of any of their conversations. Then he said, I think I would like that very much. Good, Harry said. He picked up the charred diary from the desk. Can I keep this? For reference. The magical signature is useful. It's yours, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. He turned to Snape on the way out. Professor. The potions required for soul magic in the Olympian tradition are different from standard wizarding potions, but they have overlapping component structures. If you're interested in a comparison, I've been working on the translation. Snape's expression was the one where he was very carefully not showing that something was interesting to him, which Harry had learned to read in the first year and which was, in its way, one of the most honest expressions Snape had. Leave a copy in my office, Snape said. I will, Harry said, and left. Winter in the castle had a quality he'd come to look forward to, the specific weight of snow on the roof, the way the enchanted ceiling in the great hall showed storms that moved faster than outside storms because the magic in the ceiling responded to the ambient mood of several hundred students, the way the common room fireplaces burned gold and orange and made everything easier. He was at the Quidditch pitch in January, 300 feet up, which was where he went when he needed to think without walls, when Ron found him. Ron flew up with the ungainly but effective technique of someone who had learned on a series of progressively less terrible brooms and was now on a decent one, and leveled off beside Harry and said nothing for a minute, which Harry appreciated. You talked to Dumbledore, Ron said finally. Yes. About my dad? Lucius Malfoy and the diary. I gave him everything I had. The timing, the method, the Horcrux identification. Harry looked at the dark grounds below. The Ministry has been notified. Malfoy will deny everything, he'll claim he didn't know what the diary was, which is provably false based on the magical signature traces on it. He glanced at Ron. He's going to face consequences. It might take time. The wizarding political structure is a disaster, Ron said. Complicated, Harry said diplomatically. My dad says the Malfoys own half the Ministry. They've bought significant influence, Harry agreed. Which is why the case is going to be built carefully. He paused. I've also sent everything to my father. Ron looked at him. Zeus. He has resources that aren't Ministry dependent. Harry looked at the sky. Lucius Malfoy put a Voldemort Horcrux in an 11-year-old girl and used her as a weapon and tried to kill several people in this school. Zeus has an opinion about that. Ron was quiet for a moment. What kind of opinion? The kind where consequences will arrive, Harry said, one way or another. Ron looked at the sky, at the wide gray January expanse of it, and there was something in his expression that was learning to believe in justice, which is a thing that takes time for people who have grown up in a world where injustice is common, and which requires specific evidence before it takes hold. Thanks, he said. Not for any one thing. For the accumulation. We're friends, Harry said. That's what it means. Ron nodded, looking at the horizon. His ears were pink from cold or feeling, possibly both. Can I ask you something stupid? Those are my favorite questions. Can you actually fly without the broom? Harry stepped off his broom and floated beside it at 300 feet. Ron made a sound. Yes, Harry said. Ron looked at the ground, then back at Harry, hovering in January air with the easy unconcern of someone standing on firm ground. That's genuinely unsettling. I know, Harry said cheerfully, and stepped back onto the broom, and they flew back toward the castle side by side in the cold winter air with the Quidditch pitch behind them and the lights of Hogwarts ahead, and the world was, on balance and in this specific moment, entirely good. The end of the year brought two things. The first was Dobby. The house elf had appeared in Harry's dormitory in September to warn him about coming back to Hogwarts, and Harry had told him gently but clearly that his information about dangers at Hogwarts was not the deterrent he thought it was, that Harry found dangers at Hogwarts more like navigation challenges than actual threats, and that if Dobby genuinely wanted to help he should tell Harry specifically what the danger was rather than trying to stop him from attending. Dobby had been horrified by this response in the specific way of someone whose safety plan has been rejected by the person it was meant to protect. Harry had also looked at Dobby, actually looked, past the self-deprecating terror and the enormous guilty eyes, and seen the marks that a life of magical servitude had left, and had felt something cold and steady settle in him about house elf servitude as a general institution, which was a topic he'd raised with Hermione and which had sent Hermione off on a reading project that was going to, Harry suspected, eventually become a movement. When the Malfoy situation resolved itself in June, Lucius Malfoy facing a formal inquiry at the Ministry, under evidence that was comprehensive and largely incontestable, the Malfoy family's political influence suddenly insufficient against a case built with Olympian-level precision, Harry had gone to find Dobby. The house elf was in the Hogwarts kitchens. He looked at Harry with the trembling attention of a being who had spent its whole life anticipating punishment. "Dobby," Harry said, "are you still working for the Malfoy family?" "Dobby serves the great family Malfoy," Dobby said, in a small voice with enormous layers. "Would you like to not do that?" Harry asked. Dobby stared at him. The house elf's eyes, already large, achieved new dimensions. "Dobby cannot. A house elf cannot simply, I know how house elf service works," Harry said. "I also know several loopholes in the laws governing it that the Malfoy family's legal situation has now made available." He held out a very ordinary-looking sock. According to Section 47 of the Magical Creatures and Sentient Beings Act, a house elf whose master has been formally charged under ministry inquiry loses their binding while the inquiry is ongoing, pending a new contract. The binding reverts to neutral status. He looked at Dobby steadily. "You're technically free right now. And I'm telling you that so you know." Dobby looked at the sock. He looked at Harry. He looked at the sock again. His whole body was vibrating very slightly. Harry Potter is telling Dobby that he has options," Harry said. "That's all. What you do with them is yours." The sound that came from Dobby then was not quite a word and not quite a sob and not quite a laugh, but it was deeply genuine, and his hand came out and took the sock, and Harry felt the binding snap cleanly and completely with the very specific satisfaction of a correct and long overdue thing being done. He would speak to Hermione about the broader implications. That was a conversation that needed time and care and Hermione's considerable organizational capacity. But Dobby was free now, and that was real, and real things built on each other. The second thing at the end of the year was the letter from Zeus. It arrived with an eagle rather than an owl. Olympian correspondence had its own delivery system, and the eagle landed on Harry's shoulder in the middle of dinner with the comfortable familiarity of something that knew perfectly well where it was supposed to be, and Percy Weasley at the prefect's table made a small choked sound about regulations. Harry opened it. "Harry. The Titan fragment in the Aegean has moved." Something woke it more fully than the storm activity suggested. Ares has been absent from Olympus for 11 days. These two facts may be connected or coincidental. I am inclined to believe nothing is coincidental. Come home as soon as your school year ends. Bring what you know about the Horcrux situation. There are things we need to discuss together as a family, and I believe what comes next will require all of us. Your mother has been redecorating your room again. She says she hasn't, but she has. The olive tree in the garden is doing something unusual, it may be paying attention. Hermes says he hasn't told it anything, but I believe him approximately 40% of the time. The sky misses you when you're not in it. Zeus Hera folded the letter and looked at the enchanted ceiling above the great hall, which was showing a clear summer evening, stars just beginning to appear. He thought about the Titan fragment. He thought about Ares being gone for 11 days. He thought about what waking something ancient meant in terms of what came next. Ron was looking at him. Hermione was looking at him. "Everything okay?" Ron asked. "Yes," Harry said, and meant it, because everything being complicated was not the same as everything being wrong, and the difference was something he'd learned on Olympus over 7 years and carried with him everywhere. "But next year is going to be interesting." "More interesting than this year?" Hermione asked. "Different," Harry said. "Bigger." Hermione looked at him for a moment and then, with the specific expression of someone setting down a large amount of anxiety about an uncertain future, picked up her fork and went back to dinner. "We'll manage," she said, with the clean certainty of someone who had decided it was true. "Yes," Harry said. "We will." The eagle on his shoulder ruffled its feathers once and looked at the enchanted ceiling with golden eyes, and the stars above the great hall brightened very slightly, which might have been the enchantment or might have been something else entirely. Harry ate his dinner and thought about the sky, and was ready. Chapter 5, Olympus at War. The mountain was wrong before Harry even landed. He felt it from 3 miles out, a dissonance in the ambient magic of Olympus, the kind of wrongness that you only noticed if you knew how the mountain was supposed to feel. Like a chord with one note pulled slightly flat. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But consistent, sustained, with the quality of something that had been building while he was away and had reached a pitch that the mountain couldn't smooth over anymore. He came down through the clouds above the eastern court and landed without ceremony on the flagstones, and Hermes was already there, which told him everything about the urgency. Hermes didn't do waiting. Hermes did motion. He was perched on the courtyard wall eating a fig and watching Harry land with the expression of someone who had been monitoring a problem for weeks and was relieved the reinforcements had finally arrived. "How bad?" Harry said, before Hermes could speak. "Medium to bad," Hermes said. "Trending toward bad." "Ares?" "Gone 15 days now. No message, no trace, no divine signature in any of his usual haunts." He set the fig down. "Which means he's either somewhere heavily shielded or he's down deep. The Titan fragment. That's the working theory." Hermes looked at the sky, which was doing the thing it did when Zeus was troubled, moving in patterns that didn't match the wind, clouds going the wrong direction with careful, contained anxiety. "Your father has been pulling the sky together every morning trying to sense him. Nothing. Whatever Ares found, it's behind something old enough to block divine sensing." "What's below the Aegean?" Harry asked. He was already moving toward the main hall, and Hermes fell into step beside him. "The Titan fragment, what is it specifically?" "Last time I felt it, it was old and cold and sleeping. Now it's awake. That means it has a name." "Your father thinks Kronos," Hermes said. Harry stopped walking. Hermes looked at him. "Not Kronos himself. That's still locked in Tartarus, properly locked, the seals are intact," Hephaestus checked. "But a piece of him. A conceptual fragment. The same way Voldemort splits a soul, Kronos was unmade rather than destroyed, and unmaking that absolute leaves echoes." He paused. "The echo has been sleeping in the deep Aegean for about 600 years and something woke it." "Ares woke it," Harry said. "Almost certainly." Why would Ares? He stopped himself, because the answer was forming as he asked the question, and it was not a simple answer. It was a complicated, old answer that had its roots in something Hermes had told him years ago in the Cloud Gardens: Ares is better than anyone gives him credit for, at working around things rather than through them. Challenging Zeus directly was impossible. Challenging the established divine order directly was impossible. But finding something old enough and powerful enough to destabilize the order from underneath, something that Zeus and the Olympians had beaten once before, which meant they had a specific vulnerability, a specific history that could be turned against them, that was not direct. That was patient and intelligent and deeply dangerous. He thinks it will shake the throne, Harry said. He thinks it will make the throne untenable, Hermes said quietly. Not remove Zeus. Change the conditions around Zeus enough that the established order needs rebuilding. And in the rebuilding, Ares gets to have a voice he's never had. At the cost of what? The mortal world feels it when things move in Tartarus, Hermes said. Earthquakes. Storms that aren't weather. The kind of chaos that mortals build myths around because they don't have other language for it. He looked at Harry steadily. There are 12 million people in the Mediterranean basin who have no idea that they're sitting above something that's been tipping upward for 2 months. Harry looked at the sky. The clouds were moving wrong. The whole mountain had that flat note in it, the wrongness he'd felt from 3 miles out. Where's my father? Council chamber. He's been there since this morning. Harry was already moving. Zeus was standing at the window of the council chamber when Harry came in, and the posture of him was one Harry had seen before and recognized precisely, the posture of someone carrying something very heavy and doing it alone because they'd decided they should. Back straight, hands behind him, looking at the sky as if he could fix it by watching it hard enough. Hera was at the table. She looked up when Harry came in and something in her face eased with the very particular relief of someone who has been holding tension and just found an anchor. You got my letter, Zeus said, without turning. I came as soon as term ended. Harry looked at his father's back. You should have sent earlier. We thought it would resolve, Zeus said. It didn't. No. Zeus turned. He looked tired, which was something Harry had never seen on him, not once in 7 years, and the shock of it was brief but real. Not physically tired, gods didn't tire physically. Something else. The specific exhaustion of a parent managing fear. I didn't want to pull you back from, Father, Harry said, with the clear directness that was just who he was. I live here. This is my home. Whatever is happening here is not something you manage around me. He crossed the room and stood in front of Zeus and looked at him until Zeus met his eyes. Tell me everything. Zeus looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat down, which was itself a kind of answer. Zeus standing was Zeus at a remove. Zeus sitting was Zeus actually here. Sit down, he said. Harry sat. 15 days ago Ares disappeared from Olympus. We know from tracking the divine signatures that he went into the Aegean, deep, below the floor of the sea, into the substrata where the Titan bindings are kept. He found the Chronos fragment. Zeus's hands were flat on the table. We don't know what he's done with it. We don't know if he's trying to direct it, contain it, release it, or simply use its presence as a threat. The fragment is awake and it's moving, slowly, but toward the surface. Whatever Ares started, the fragment is amplifying it now, and the amplification means it doesn't need Ares's direction anymore. Can you seal it back down? Not from here. Not from the surface. The sealing would need to happen from below, from inside the substrata, at the source. Which means someone has to go down into the deep Aegean and into the Titan binding layers. Zeus looked at Harry. And whoever goes will be alone, because the substrata magic interferes with divine communication. No backup. No signal. No reaching out. So it's a solo mission, Harry said. We've been trying to identify another approach, Hera said from across the table. She said it in the tone of someone who has been through every alternative and keeps arriving back at the same answer. There isn't one. I'll go, Harry said. Zeus was already shaking his head. I'll go, Harry said again, the same way the second time as the first time, not raised, not pressured, just clear. I can navigate the substrata. I felt the fragment last time, I know its signature, I can find it. And if Ares is down there, he paused. I need to talk to Ares anyway. You don't negotiate with someone who has armed a Titan fragment, Zeus said. I'm not going to negotiate, Harry said. I'm going to find out what he actually wants. He held his father's gaze. There's something Ares wants that he hasn't been able to ask for because the asking would make him look weak and the asking would be an admission, and Ares doesn't do either of those things. He's been sitting on it for years and now he's done something monumentally dangerous because the long way wasn't working. Harry leaned forward slightly. He's not a villain. He's a god who feels like he doesn't have a place in his own home. That's something I understand. Zeus and Hera looked at each other over Harry's head. The conversation that happened in that look was long and comprehensive and ended with something that wasn't agreement so much as recognition. You go down, Hera said. You find Ares. You try to bring him back. She met Harry's eyes with absolute clarity. If the fragment is loose enough to be a genuine threat, you seal it and come back to us. No heroics that cost you the ending. When have I ever done unnecessary heroics? Harry said. The diary, Hera said. That was necessary heroics. The basilisk. Also necessary, Harry. I'll be careful, he said, and he meant it the way he meant everything, completely and without performance. The Aegean in late June was warm at the surface and cold very quickly beneath it, and cold in the specific way of water that hasn't been reached by sunlight in centuries, not just temperature but something older, a chill that was partly physical and partly the accumulated weight of depth and time. Harry went down without a boat and without equipment because neither was useful at the depths he was going. He flew at the surface and then dropped below it and moved down through the water the way he moved through weather, understanding the medium rather than fighting it, adjusting rather than forcing. The light went from blue to gray to a darkness that was different from nighttime darkness, that had mass and age in it. Marine creatures sensed him and moved away, not in panic, in the way things moved away from something that registered as too large for the category of danger they'd evolved to respond to. He felt the substrata before he reached it, a texture change in the ambient magic, the regular mortal world magic giving way to something older and less organized, the raw material that the world had been made from before structure arrived. The Titan binding layers were built into this, literally woven into the substrata's fabric, which was why they'd held for 3,000 years and why getting to them from above was so difficult. He found the gap that Ares had used. Not hard to find, a god's passage left a signature, and Ares's signature was war-specific, the particular smell of a battlefield made into an intention, and he went through it and into the binding layers and the pressure changed again. The binding layers were a marvel of divine engineering. Harry had read about them in the Olympian archives, but reading and being inside were different experiences. The whole architecture of it was visible here, binding threads running in all directions, intersecting in points of enormous density, the web that had held the unmade Titans for 3,000 years. Most of the threads were undisturbed. But in the southeastern quadrant, below the deepest part of the Aegean, there was damage. Not catastrophic. But specific. The threading had been pulled, in a dozen places, with precision, and the pulling had created a loosening in the weave, and into the loosening the Chronos fragment had pressed. It was visible from 50 yards away. Harry stopped and looked at it. The fragment was not a creature and not entirely an absence of one, it occupied the space between those categories, a roiling darkness with a density that pulled at the binding threads around it, pulling more of them loose with the slow, thoughtless pressure of something enormous waking in a space too small for it. It hadn't broken free. But it had stretched the weave. And in another week, maybe two, the stretching would become tearing. Ares was 12 feet from it, sitting on a section of binding thread that had compressed into something solid enough to sit on, with his armor off and his arms on his knees and his head tilted back, looking at the fragment with an expression that Harry had never seen on him in 7 years. He looked like someone who had done something irreversible and was sitting with that. Harry moved to stand beside him. Ares didn't look up. He probably felt Harry coming from a long way out. "You're an idiot," Harry said, pleasantly. "Leave, Harry," Ares said. "Not without you." Harry looked at the fragment, felt its pull, filed its strength. "How long have you been down here?" "Long enough." "Did you release it on purpose or did it get away from you?" A long pause. Ares's jaw moved. "I directed it to the surface." Just enough to destabilize the Aegean weather system. Just enough to make a point. He looked at the fragment now, and his expression was something Harry had never seen from him before, an honest face, underneath the war god face, the face of someone who had been doing a thing for a long time and was tired of doing it. It didn't stay directed. No, Harry said. Ancient evil doesn't tend to. I know that, Ares said. Then why? Ares stood. He moved away from the fragment, toward the binding weave wall, and put his back against it and looked at Harry with the expression he'd worn in the training yard years ago, that honest, complicated, not quite resolved thing that Harry had been waiting to understand for years. Because he gave you everything, Ares said. In one day. One ceremony. Everything that I have been standing next to for thousands of years and have never been given. The words fell into the deep water around them and sat there. He gave you thunder, Ares said. Thunder is his. It's always been his. It's the symbol of the entire order we live in. And he handed it to a child who walked in from a cupboard. He said it without venom, which was the most honest version of it. And I understood the fates. I understood the prophecy. I understood that it was necessary and correct and that the thread meant something real. He stopped. I still couldn't make it not feel like being told for the 1000th time that I don't matter the way the rest of them do. The binding threads moved around them, slow and constant. You think Zeus doesn't value you, Harry said. I think Zeus values what I provide, Ares said. War. The function of it. The maintenance of it. He calls me when there's work to be done and the rest of the time I am the embarrassing one at the table, the violent one, the one they all make polite faces about. He looked at Harry. You walked in at 5 years old and in a week they were all crowding around you with genuine interest. Not because you were useful. Because they liked you. Athena likes you, Harry said. Athena tolerates me because we're siblings. She came to your defense 3 months ago when Poseidon made that comment that was strategy. It wasn't, Harry said. I was there. I saw her face. He moved closer. Ares. You have spent thousands of years telling yourself a story about what this family thinks of you. And you've used that story to justify staying at a distance where the story can't be disproven. And then when something came along that felt like proof of the story, instead of asking for what you actually want, you came down here and did this. He gestured at the fragment. Which is the most war god approach to an emotional problem I have ever seen. Ares looked at him for a long moment. You're 12. 13, Harry said. And I was raised by Hera, who could diagnose this kind of thing at 100 yards in the dark. Something moved in Ares's expression that might have been the beginning of something. What do you actually want? Harry asked. Say it. Not the thing about thunder. The real thing. The silence between them had the weight of very deep water. To be seen as more than a function, Ares said, finally. The words had the quality of something that had been held for a very long time. To be, part of the family. Actually part of it. Not the one that gets called when there's a war and ignored when there isn't. Then come back up, Harry said, and say that. Zeus won't. Zeus is sitting in the council chamber looking tired in a way I've never seen because his son is missing and the world is at risk and he doesn't know what to do about either, Harry said. Say what you just said to me. To him. That is all you need to do. Ares looked at him. It's not that simple. Most true things are, Harry said. The complicated parts are the ones we add. Ares was quiet. He looked at the fragment. He looked at the binding weave. He looked like someone doing a calculation that he'd been refusing to do for 3,000 years and had finally committed to running. The fragment, he said. If I help seal it, we seal it together, Harry said. That's what comes next. Together. Ares looked at him for a long, specific moment. Then he put his armor back on, not quickly, with the deliberate care of someone re-establishing themselves, and when he was done he looked like the war god again, but something behind his eyes had shifted in a way that Harry thought was probably permanent. "Tell me what you need," Ares said. Sealing the Chronos fragment was not like sealing the Aegean storms. The Aegean storms had been directed by it, surface-level work, removing an anchor and watching the system collapse. The fragment itself was something else. It had been woken, pressed into the weave, and it did not want to go back to sleep. Harry felt its resistance when he approached. It pushed at him, not physically, not with force, but with the specific Titan quality pressure of something ancient and unmade pressing its wrongness against the edges of a defined thing. "You are not large enough to contain me," was what the feeling said. "I have been here since before your kind existed." "Yes," Harry thought back. "And you're going back to sleep regardless." He extended his awareness into the binding weave, felt the full architecture of it, all the threads, the damaged section where Ares's interference had created the loosening. The repair needed to happen at the same time as the containment, and both needed to happen from inside the weave, which was theoretically impossible for a being too large to fit within the threads. Harry was not too large. He was a god of magic, which meant he understood the grammar of built things, the way power was organized into structure. He moved through the weave the way he moved through weather, not forcing, finding the language of it and speaking it. Ares stood at the fragment's edge and did what war gods did, which was hold a line. He planted himself between the fragment and the direction it was pressing and pushed back, not with aggression but with the specific unmovable quality that Ares had when he committed to something, the quality that made armies stop, the quality that actually was what he'd said he didn't want to be reduced to, but that was, in this moment, exactly what was needed. Harry worked in the weave. He repaired the damaged threads first, not with his own power but by finding the existing pattern and continuing it, the way you repair a broken circuit by completing the circuit rather than replacing it. The threads were impossibly old and impossibly dense, and they responded to him with the slow suspicion of things that hadn't been touched in centuries, but they responded, and the repair moved forward, and as it moved forward the loosening tightened and the space the fragment had been pressing into narrowed. The fragment fought it. The cold darkness of it pushed harder, desperate. It wasn't a conscious desperation, it was the simple unthinking pressure of a thing that existed and didn't want to stop existing, and Harry felt genuine sympathy for it and sealed it anyway, because sympathy and necessity were not opposites, and because 12 million people above the surface of the sea needed this to be done. Rest, he thought toward it, and sealed the last thread, and the fragment went still. The silence in the binding layers was absolute. Ares lowered his stance. He looked at the sealed section, at the repaired weave, tight and whole, the fragment pressed back and contained, and said nothing for a moment. "That was good work," Harry said. "I've done worse things in a day," Ares said. "And better. You held the line. Line holding is what I do." He looked at Harry sideways, and there was something in the look that was new, not warm exactly, not soft, but open. The way a door is open when the lock has been taken off. "You went into the weave," Ares said. "That's not, no one goes into the binding weave." "I'm small enough," Harry said. "You're not small." Ares looked at him with the honest directness of someone who had decided, in the last 3 hours, to be honest about things. "You're the most peculiar god this mountain has produced in 1,000 years. You're barely 13 and you just repaired Titan binding architecture." He paused. "I've been an idiot." "Yes," Harry agreed. "You could have said that more diplomatically." "I could have. I decided not to." Harry started moving back toward Ares's gap in the substrata, and Ares fell into step beside him. "When we get back up, you're going to talk to Zeus." "You keep saying that as if it's simple." "Because it is. You've decided to make it not simple so that when it doesn't go perfectly you can say you knew it wouldn't." Harry looked at him. "What if it goes well?" Ares said nothing. "You haven't actually allowed for that possibility," Harry said. "You've planned for confirmation of what you already believe. But what if Zeus sits down with you and says the thing you actually need to hear? You don't have a plan for that because having a plan for it means wanting it, and wanting it means it can be taken away. The deep water moved around them. I know that feeling, Harry said, quieter. I spent 5 years in a cupboard learning not to want things because wanting them and not having them was worse than not wanting them at all. He looked at Ares steadily. I was 5 and I didn't know any better. You're 3,000 years old. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had said something real and were both sitting with it. I hate it when you're right, Ares said, finally. You don't, Harry said. You just hate that you didn't think of it first. Ares looked at him. For the first time in 7 years of complicated, charged, occasionally violent acquaintance, he laughed, short and sharp and entirely genuine, a sound that probably hadn't come out of him in a century. Come on, he said, and moved through the gap, and Harry followed him up through the deep water toward the light. They broke the surface of the Aegean in the late afternoon, and the sky above them was the specific clarity that followed storms, washed and deep blue, with the last light of the day going amber at the western horizon. Harry flew and Ares rode the wind beside him, and neither of them spoke on the way back to the mountain. Olympus felt different as they came in. The flat note was gone. The clouds were moving correctly. Zeus was in the eastern court. Harry had thought he'd be in the council chamber, but Zeus was in the court, standing in the exact center of it, and when Harry and Ares came down he was already looking at them with an expression that did a lot of work at once, relief and controlled fury and love and something that needed to become a conversation as fast as possible. Harry landed. Ares landed beside him. Zeus looked at his son, the one he'd had for 7 years, and then at the other one, the one he'd had for 3,000, and Harry said, I'm going to go find Mum, and walked away. He was aware this was a transparent exit. He was also aware it was the right move, and moved accordingly. He found Hera in the garden, because Hera was always where she needed to be. She looked at him when he came through the door, looked him over with the comprehensive parental scan of someone checking for damage, and when she confirmed he was intact she came and put her arms around him and held on with a force that communicated the full experience of the last 15 days very efficiently. Harry held on back. Ares is talking to Zeus, he said, into her shoulder. I know, she said. I could feel it from here. She pulled back and looked at him with her clear eyes. Was it the fragment? What we thought? Kronos' echo. It's sealed. The weave is repaired. He looked at the garden, at the olive tree. Ares is, he paused, finding the right word. He's not a villain. He never was. He's just someone who learned the wrong lesson about what love looked like and never had it contradicted. Hera looked at him for a long moment. That's very generous. It's just true, Harry said. I don't think it's generous. She smoothed the hair off his forehead the way she'd been doing since he was 5 years old, and the scar was there, lightning-shaped, the record of his mother's love, and she touched it very briefly with the same specific expression she always had about it, equal parts tenderness and old fury, directed at nothing currently present. You need to eat, she said. I always need to eat. You always come back from things having forgotten to eat, she said, which was a reasonable characterization. Come. They went inside, and the mountain breathed normally around them, and in the eastern court Zeus and Ares stood 6 feet apart and had a conversation that neither of them would fully recount afterward but that both of them would remember completely. Harry heard the shape of it from Hermes, who had heard most of it from a calculated distance because Hermes was Hermes. Zeus had said, you should have told me. Ares had said, you never seemed to want to hear it. There had been a long silence. Zeus had said, I am not good at this. You know I'm not good at this. I've never, and then stopped and started again. I have done you a disservice. Not the thunder. Not Harry. A longer disservice than that. I have called you when there was work and not called you when there wasn't, and I have let that stand as our relationship because it was easy, and because I told myself it was what you wanted, and I think I knew better and didn't look at it. Ares had not said anything for a while. Then he'd said, I endangered the mortal world. Yes, Zeus said. We'll deal with that. There are consequences. But consequences and another stop. You are my son. The endangerment matters. You mattering also matters. Both things are true. Both things can be true, Harry thought, when Hermes told him. Hera's words, finding their way into Zeus's mouth through 7 years of Harry carrying them home. There were consequences. Ares spent 2 months in the substrata helping reinforce the binding weave he'd damaged, which was both appropriate punishment and genuinely useful labor that Ares performed with grim efficiency and that left the binding layers stronger than they'd been in 500 years. He came back to Olympus in September in the specific way of someone who has served a sentence and is not sure yet what they're returning to. Harry was in the training yard when Ares arrived. He didn't say anything. He picked up a practice sword from the rack and held it out. Ares looked at it for a long moment. Then he took it. They worked through forms for 2 hours, no conversation, and it was different from the last time they'd fought. No testing. No proving. Just 2 gods with practice swords in the afternoon light, working the same problems from different angles, and the yard was quiet and focused and the air had none of the old tension in it. When they stopped, Ares said, "You went into the binding weave for me." "I went into the binding weave for the 12 million people above the sea," Harry said. "You being there made it possible to do it quickly." "That's not," Ares stopped. "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Distributing the credit." "I'm not. You sealed the most dangerous thing in the Mediterranean substrata while managing a 3,000-year-old war god's emotional crisis," Ares said, flatly, which was the specific way Ares said things he found embarrassing but true. "That is not small. Stop making it small." Harry looked at him. "Fine," he said. "It was impressive." "Yes. It was. A beat." Harry's mouth moved. "Don't smile," Ares said. Harry smiled. He couldn't help it. Ares looked at the sky with the expression of someone being deeply tested by circumstance. "Same time tomorrow?" Harry said. Ares looked at him sideways. The door that had been opened in the deep water, the one without the lock, was still open. It would probably always be open now, Harry thought. Things that were finally real tended to stay real. "Same time," Ares said. The thing Harry hadn't dealt with was the scar. In the chaos of the end of year and the Titan fragment and Ares and the substrata work, he put it aside the way you put things aside when they're not urgently on fire. But Dumbledore had said it would weaken, and Harry had said a few months, and it was now 4 months later and the scar had been doing something different. He was sitting on the balcony after dinner in the September dark when he became aware of it. The wall he kept between himself and the fragment was doing less work than usual, not because the fragment was stronger but because it was thinner. Not thin failing. Thin fading. Like the last of a signal going out. He reached for it with careful precision, the way you reach for something fragile in the dark, and felt it properly for the first time without the wall between them. It was a small thing. A withered, compressed echo of something that had once been vast and cold and terrible, now reduced to a faint signature barely distinguishable from the ambient magical noise of the scar tissue. The divinity in him had been slowly, steadily, continuously incompatible with it for 7 years, the way an immune system works on something foreign without announcement, and the fragment had been losing ground the entire time. He could end it now. He felt the shape of what was required, a single focused push, pure divine magic aimed at the fragment's anchor point, and it would disperse. Not destroy, because you couldn't really destroy a soul, even a corrupted one, just release it. Let it scatter. Stop being a container for it. He did it with less effort than he'd spent on the binding weave repair, with less effort, honestly, than a medium difficulty transfiguration, and felt it go. The scar didn't change. It never would. It was bone deep, woven in by the magic of that night, and it was a record, as it had always been, of what his mother had done. But the thing that had lived in it was gone, and the place where it had been was clean. He sat on the balcony and felt the clean space where the Horcrux had been and thought about Voldemort, who had just lost an anchor without knowing it. Who was somewhere in the world, in a form that was still insufficient for what he wanted to be, gathering himself for an attempt that was getting closer. Harry had felt it in the magical climate of Britain over the summer, a very faint increase in the concentration of dark magic, the way weather systems concentrate before a storm. He was building. Harry thought about the remaining Horcruxes. He and Dumbledore had been working on the list with the quiet methodology of two people approaching a complex problem from different angles. Dumbledore had memories, research, a lifetime-specific knowledge of Tom Riddle's psychology and history. Harry had the ability to feel Horcrux signatures from the ambient magic, the divine instinct for soul-contaminated objects that had been sharpened by his encounter with the diary. They had identified 4 probable locations. One had already been destroyed. The diary was gone. The scar fragment was gone. That left, by their combined estimate, 3 more objects and whatever Voldemort carried in his own fragmenting soul. All of this would need dealing with. But the dealing would come when it came, and forcing it before it was ready would make it messier, and Harry had learned from Zeus and from Hera and from the Binding Weave that timing was not cowardice, timing was the difference between clean resolution and chaos. He heard the balcony door and turned. Zeus stood in the doorway, reading his face with the comprehensive attention of 7 years of parenthood. "The scar," Zeus said. "Gone," Harry said. The fragment dispersed. Zeus came and sat down. They sat in silence for a moment, the mountain breathing around them. "There are 3 more," Harry said. "Objects. And then Voldemort himself, when he takes a proper form." "Yes. And then it's done." "Yes." Harry looked at the stars. The mountain was quiet around them and the stars were enormous in the autumn dark, the same stars he'd sat under at 5 years old with his one-eared lion and learned for the first time what safe felt like. "Are you ready?" Zeus asked. Harry thought about the question. Not rhetorically, actually thought about it, with the careful honesty he brought to everything. He was 13. He was a god and a wizard. He had the sky behind him and a family around him and 2 best friends who would walk into a chamber of secrets or a flooded train platform without being asked, who trusted him and were worth being trusted. He had Ares, now, not an ally exactly, not yet, but something beginning, something with a door with no lock in it. He had Dumbledore, with his actual honesty and his long knowledge. He had the clean space in his scar and the repaired Binding Weave and the sealed diary and the fragment dispersed into nothing. He had, for the first time in the long story of what was building in the wizarding world, every single piece in the right place. "Yes," he said. Zeus put his arm around his son's shoulders and they sat together on the balcony of Olympus and watched the stars move, and the mountain held them, and the sky was clear from horizon to horizon, and whatever was coming, and they were ready. 3 weeks later the letter arrived. Different from the Hogwarts letters. Different from Zeus's eagle post. This one arrived in the middle of the night, sliding under the door of Harry's room without a carrier, the letter itself moving on divine or near-divine power, which meant someone with considerable magic had sent it by intention rather than physical delivery. Harry picked it up. Opened it. The handwriting was his own. Not his. The handwriting of someone who had once been called Tom Riddle and had taught themselves to write with the specific care of an orphan who wanted to make nothing look easy. Harry recognized it from the diary. Dark ink, precise, with the careful control of someone who never fully relaxed. Harry Potter. You destroyed my diary. You shattered my connection to the basilisk. You purged the piece of me that was in your scar. You dismantled 3 years of work in 2 school years and you did it with the specific casual efficiency of someone who finds it easy. I want you to know that I know what you are now. I have done my research. I understand what was done to you and what it means. I understand the fate's thread. I want you to know, also, that I am not afraid of you. Come September, I will have a body. Come September, the game changes. Whatever you think you have prepared, it will not be sufficient. You are powerful. You are the son of gods. But I have been death and I have been beyond death and I have rebuilt myself from nothing 3 times, and there is a specific kind of knowledge that comes from surviving your own destruction that gods who have never died cannot understand. I will see you soon, Harry Potter. Lord Voldemort. Harry read it twice. Folded it. Set it on his desk. Went to his window and looked at the mountain, at the dark sky, at the stars he knew by name. Then he picked up a piece of parchment and wrote back. Dear Voldemort, thank you for the letter. I appreciate the advance notice. I'll see you in September. Harry he sent it with his owl, who took it with the slightly judgmental air of a bird who felt her services were being used for something beneath her dignity, and watched her go, and went back to bed, and slept with the complete ease of someone who had nothing to fear from what was coming. In the letter, between the lines of Voldemort's controlled threats, Harry had read the thing that was actually there, the very specific, very real quality of a man who had discovered that his enemy was not what he'd planned for and was telling himself, very loudly and very carefully, that it didn't matter. It was, Harry thought, as he closed his eyes, the most honest thing Voldemort had ever said.